Hello, my friend. Tonight we wander beneath ancient skies where frightened shepherds stare upward at unfamiliar lights drifting silently through cold darkness. The wind carries dust across empty hills. A distant fire crackles softly beside rough stone shelters. Somewhere beyond the sleeping horizon, human beings wonder whether the heavens are truly empty, or whether unseen eyes patiently observe every trembling generation below. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the night settles around, you feel free to share your location and local time in the comments below. There is something strangely comforting about imagining listeners scattered across the world awake together beneath the same ancient sky. Your mind drifts backward through thousands of years beyond crowded highways and glowing apartment towers, beyond written history itself, until the earth feels quieter and far more uncertain. You walk beside wandering tribes who carry sharpened bone tools and faded animal skins. The air smells of smoke, wet soil, and crushed herbs beneath careful footsteps. Every storm feels personal. Every eclipse feels dangerous. Every star seems alive. And above these early humans hangs a terrifying possibility. What if someone is watching? The old stories describe beings descending from the heavens during humanity's earliest ages. Not gentle guardians, not glowing protectors floating peacefully among clouds. These figures arrive carrying dangerous knowledge and unsettling ambition. Later traditions call them watchers, silent observers who abandon their distant place above and step directly into the fragile human world. For a moment, it feels as though you stand beside the first witnesses. They stare upward, while strange figures emerge against moonlit ridges. The visitors appear almost human, yet deeply wrong in subtle ways. Their movements seem too smooth. Their faces remain unreadable. Villagers whisper nervously while clutching crude spears beside weak fires. Nobody sleeps easily afterward. Some historians connected to research from Oxford and Harvard note that many ancient civilizations independently developed stories about divine beings, sharing forbidden knowledge with humanity. Scholars often interpret these myths as symbolic reflections of sudden technological change among early societies. Yet the similarities between distant traditioners continue fascinating researchers even today. The night grows colder around your imagination. You hear sandals scraping dry stone paths while tribal elders gather near flickering flames. Children hide behind woven blankets. Dogs whine softly into darkness. One elderly storyteller raises trembling hands toward the stars and describes beings descending long ago from heavenly realms beyond ordinary understanding. The details vary across centuries and cultures naturally. Human memory behaves like water flowing through uneven ground. Stories shift shape, names change, empires rise and rewrite older beliefs, yet certain patterns stubbornly survive. The Watchers always bring knowledge, not harmless lessons either. They teach secrets carrying consequences, metalworking, astrology, weapons, charms, hidden arts connected to power and temptation. Humanity advances rapidly afterward, but peace quietly disappears. Oddly enough, one curious detail appears repeatedly throughout ancient traditions. The heavenly visitors rarely behave like perfect rulers. Instead, they resemble deeply flawed beings, overcome by pride, desire, or restless curiosity. Some researchers from the University of Chicago argue these stories may reflect early anxieties surrounding powerful outsiders introducing disruptive technologies into isolated communities. You continue walking through this ancient mental landscape while stars burn brightly overhead. There are no electric lights here, no engines humming beyond distant streets. The darkness feels immense and alive. Even silence carries weight. A child beside the fire asks whether the sky beings will return tomorrow. Nobody answers immediately. The oldest adults exchange worried glances because they fear the same possibility. In many traditions, the Watchers do not simply visit humanity. They become entangled with human life itself. Boundaries weaken. Order begins unraveling. ancient storytellers describe a world slowly tilting toward chaos after these heavenly figures descend. One scandalous aside appears within several surviving traditions. Certain stories claim the Watchers became fascinated by humanity itself, especially human beauty, emotion, and mortality. That fascination changes everything. Instead of remaining distant observers, they interfere directly with earthly existence. Desire overcomes restraint, curiosity overcomes duty, and history becomes dangerous. You can almost smell the smoke rising from cedarwood fires while nervous communities debate what these beings truly are. God's spirits, wanderers from unknown lands. Human language struggles to describe encounters beyond familiar experience. Ancient people explain extraordinary events, using symbols available to them, weaving together fear, reverence, and imagination beneath vast skies. Records preserved by scholars at Cambridge and Stanford confirm that ancient Mesopotamian, Hebrew, and Near Eastern traditions often borrowed themes from neighboring cultures while adapting them into local beliefs. This blending created layered myths where divine rebellion, forbidden wisdom, and catastrophic punishment repeatedly appear together. Still, arguments split sharply regarding whether these similarities reflect direct cultural exchange or deeper shared psychological patterns. The fire beside you crackles softly. Somewhere nearby, insects hum through tall grass. A distant owl calls across the darkness. Human beings remain small here, fragile, temporary, yet these stories survive longer than kingdoms. That alone feels remarkable. Your thoughts drift toward the emotional heart hidden beneath the legends. The Watchers represent more than supernatural beings descending from heaven. They embody humanity's uneasy relationship with knowledge itself. Every discovery changes civilization. Every innovation creates new risks beside new possibilities. Fire cooks food but burns forests, metal shapes tools but also weapons. Knowledge illuminates darkness while quietly creating fresh shadows. Perhaps ancient people understood this more clearly than modern societies often admit. A council decree uncovered near ancient Mesopotamian sites proves early rulers frequently associated unauthorized knowledge with social disorder and divine anger. Control over sacred information meant political power. Stories warning against forbidden teachings therefore served both spiritual and practical purposes within fragile civilizations. Still no agreement has been reached regarding how literally ancient audiences understood these accounts. Some scholars from Yale believe the Watchers were always symbolic figures representing human corruption and ambition. Others suggest certain communities genuinely believe supernatural beings physically interacted with humanity during prehistoric ages. The debate continues quietly through modern universities and late-night documentaries alike, and maybe that uncertainty explains why the legends still linger inside modern imagination. Deep down, people remain fascinated by forbidden doors, hidden truths, dangerous wisdom waiting beyond ordinary understanding. The same curiosity pulls you forward. Now, you continue walking beside these ancient fires while nervous storytellers glance repeatedly toward the heavens. The stars above seem impossibly bright without modern pollution dulling their sharpness. Entire rivers of light stretch across the night sky. To early humans, the universe feels crowded with intention. Every moving object carries meaning. Then something changes overhead. A strange brightness crosses the darkness beyond distant hills. The villagers fall silent immediately. Even the dogs stop growling. Nobody breathes for several uneasy moments because somewhere inside their frightened hearts rises an impossible thought. Perhaps the Watchers are returning once again. The strange brightness glides slowly beyond the hills, while every frightened villager remains frozen beside fading firelight. You hear dry grass shifting beneath uncertain footsteps. Smoke curls upward into cold night air, carrying the bitter scent of burned cedar and animal fat. Nobody dares speak loudly now. Even whispers feel dangerous beneath such enormous skies. Morning eventually arrives, pale and dusty across endless wilderness. You walk beside a wandering tribe moving carefully through open valleys long before great cities dominate the earth. Their world feels both vast and painfully small. Rivers decide survival, storms decide hunger. Illness appears without warning and disappears just as mysteriously. Every day requires attention to tiny details that modern people rarely notice. The shape of clouds, the direction of birds, the smell of rain carried across distant hills. Life remains fragile here. The people surrounding you possess no grand temples yet, no towering palaces, no written libraries preserving generations of thought. Stories survive only through memory and repetition. An elder speaks beside the evening fire, and children carry those words into adulthood like precious water crossing dry land. Your feet crunch softly across rocky ground while hunters return carrying thin deer hides and sharpened stone blades. Their faces reveal exhaustion mixed with relief. Successful hunts mean another week of survival. Failure means silent hunger spreading through families beneath freezing nights. And always above these wandering people, the heavens remain watchful. For a moment, it feels as though every star presses downward with quiet attention. Ancient humans rarely viewed the sky as empty space. The heavens breathed with purpose. Strange lights moving overhead inspired awe, fear, and endless speculation. A comet could announce disaster. A meteor might signal divine anger. Unusual celestial events carried a modernal weight impossible to ignore. One curious footnote preserved within early oral traditions describes wandering lights that appeared before major social upheavals. Some modern researchers from Princeton and Columbia suggest these accounts may reflect ancient observations of astronomical phenomena later woven into mythological storytelling. Yet scholars still debate whether such stories primarily serve symbolic purposes rather than recording literal events. You continue beside the tribe as seasons slowly change. Spring arrives gently across the valleys. Wild herbs release sharp fragrance beneath warming sunlight. Children gather roots while elders teach survival skills beside narrow streams. Simple routines shape existence. Water must be carried, fires maintained, shelters repaired after every storm. Still something restless lingers within human imagination. At night, younger members of the tribe gather separately from older adults and whisper about the strange brightness seen crossing distant hills weeks earlier. Curiosity spreads quietly through the camp like sparks travelling across dry grass. One hunter swears he saw tall figures standing motionless beside a ridge during moonlight. Another insists strange voices echoed through nearby caves before dawn. Nobody fully agrees on details. That uncertainty only deepens the fascination. Research from Stanford and the University of California confirms that early human societies often interpreted unexplained natural events through spiritual frameworks shaped by the environmental pressures and survival anxieties. Harsh landscapes encouraged belief systems emphasizing unseen forces influencing daily existence. Yet some anthropologists argue these traditions also strengthened social unity by creating shared narratives around fear and wonder. The tribe eventually reaches a fertile valley surrounded by steep cliffs and dark forests. Here life becomes slightly easier. Animals gather near fresh water sources. Fruit grows along sheltered hillsides. Temporary camps slowly transform into more permanent settlements. You witness humanity beginning to settle down. The change appears small initially. A stronger shelter here, a storage pit there, but gradually routines become less nomadic. Families return repeatedly to familiar ground instead of wandering endlessly across dangerous wilderness. Seeds accidentally dropped near camps begin sprouting months later. Patterns emerge. Civilization whispers its first quiet promises, and with settlement comes new vulnerability. Villages attract attention. Stored food invites raids. Larger communities require rules leadership and organized labor. Human relationships grow more complicated once survival depends upon cooperation between strangers living close together. Oddly enough, many ancient legends place the arrival of heavenly teachers precisely during this transition from wandering tribes toward organized settlements. Some historians from Yale believe these stories symbolically represent humanity's rapid social evolution during the agricultural revolution. Others argue the myths preserve cultural memories of influential outsiders introducing unfamiliar technologies into isolated communities. The villagers around you begin noticing unfamiliar signs near the valley edges, strange markings carved into stone, footprints larger than ordinary human tracks, fires burning briefly upon distant hills before vanishing again by dawn. Fear returns quietly. You smell wet clay and fresh rain, while community leaders gather beneath rough wooden shelters to discuss growing concerns. Their voices remain low and tense. Some believe neighbouring tribes approach nearby territory. Others suspect spirits wandering from sacred mountains beyond the northern horizon. Then an elderly woman speaks softly. She remembers stories told by her grandmother long ago, stories about watchers descending during humanity's earliest generations, beings who observed human struggle from distant heavenly places before eventually stepping into mortal lands themselves. The younger listeners lean closer. Outside wind rattles woven reed walls. Somewhere beyond the settlement, wolves howl beneath gathering clouds. The atmosphere feels heavy with expectation. Ancient communities often existed psychologically close to mystery, in ways difficult for modern societies to fully understand. Darkness concealed endless possibilities before electric lights and scientific explanations reshaped daily perception. No agreement has been reached among modern scholars regarding why heavenly observer myths appear so consistently across unrelated cultures. Researchers from Cambridge and Harvard continue examining whether these stories emerged independently through common psychological patterns or spread through ancient trade networks connecting distant civilizations. The debate itself becomes part of the mystery. Your mind drifts deeper into the valley settlement, while daily life continues unfolding around nervous speculation. Women grind grain beside flat stones. Hunters repair damaged spears near smoking fires. Children chase each other between rough shelters, briefly forgetting the anxious whispers surrounding adults. Then one evening, just after sunset, everything changes. A group of strangers appears at the valley edge. They arrive suddenly from the northern hills where fading light paints long shadows across stone ridges. Their clothing looks unfamiliar. Their posture seems strangely calm. Villagers immediately gather children behind protective lines, while gripping hunting spears with trembling hands. The newcomers do not raise weapon. Instead, one figure steps forward carrying something reflective beneath fading sunlight. Polished metal. Impossible metal. Smooth and bright, unlike anything local craftsmen have ever created using primitive stone tools. Gasps ripple through the settlement. You can almost feel human history tilting quietly in that moment. Knowledge has arrived from somewhere beyond ordinary understanding. Whether these strangers are divine beings, wandering travellers, or something between both possibilities hardly matters initially. Their presence alone transforms the emotional landscape surrounding this isolated community, because now the villagers understand something unsettling. The world is larger than they imagined, and somewhere beyond familiar valleys and trusted fires, unknown watchers may already be walking among humanity. The polished metal catches the final traces of sunlight while the entire valley settlement stares in stunned silence. You hear nervous breathing beside crackling fires. Somewhere nearby, a child begins crying softly before a parent pulls them close against rough-woven clothing. The strangers remain motionless at the settlement edge, calm beneath growing darkness. No one welcomes them immediately, yet nobody attacks either. Curiosity slowly overpowers fear, which has always been one of humanity's most dangerous habits. The villagers study these newcomers carefully. Their garments appear cleaner than ordinary travel clothes. Their tools seem impossibly refined. Even their posture feels unusual, almost disciplined, beyond normal human behavior. One elderly hunter mutters that they resemble figures from old stories. The strangers speak eventually, though their language sounds unfamiliar at first. Certain words overlap with local dialects enough for broken understanding to emerge through patient gestures and repeated phrases. They ask for water, shelter, fire, simple requests carrying enormous consequences. Because once strangers enter the village circle, boundaries begin dissolving. Night settles fully across the valley while stars spread above like scattered frost. You sit beside the communal fire listening to cautious conversation unfold between villagers and newcomers. Smoke drifts through cold air carrying scents of roasted grain and burning pine resin. The strangers observe everything carefully, especially the sky. That detail unsettles people most. Again and again, the visitors raise their eyes toward the heavens as though studying hidden patterns invisible to ordinary humans. One younger villager notices strange markings scratched onto a smooth stone tablet carried by the tallest newcomer. The symbols resemble no local carvings. Knowledge hides inside them. Records examined by researchers from Oxford and the University of Chicago confirm that ancient societies often associated literacy and advanced craftsmanship with divine or semi-divine figures. Communities encountering unfamiliar technologies naturally interpreted skilled outsiders through spiritual frameworks shaped by existing mythology. Still, some historians argue later generations exaggerated these encounters into supernatural legends over centuries of retelling. The firelight flickers across uneasy faces. You notice how quickly admiration begins replacing fear. The strangers demonstrate practical skills unlike anything villagers have witnessed before. One visitor sharpens a damaged blade using unfamiliar techniques. Another shows women how certain herbs can preserve stored grain longer against rotten insects. A third studies the stars while predicting tomorrow's weather with disturbing accuracy. Small miracles accumulate rapidly. Within days, the newcomers become central figures inside the settlement. Villagers gather constantly around them, seeking advice, cures, and explanations. Children follow them through narrow paths carrying endless questions. Hunters request stronger weapon designs. Elders ask about distant lands beyond surrounding mountains. The strangers answer selectively. That selective silence creates even greater fascination. Your mind drifts through spooky evenings where exhausted villagers listen beside fires, while one newcomer traces star patterns across hardened dirt. He explains seasonal cycles connected to celestial movement. He predicts flooding periods. He identifies certain stars guiding travelers safely through wilderness after dark. The listeners stare like devoted students. A curious detail preserved in several ancient traditions claims heavenly teachers introduced astronomy before organized religion fully developed. Scholars from Cambridge and Stanford note that early sky observation became essential for agriculture navigation and political authority within emerging civilizations. Yet arguments continue regarding whether myths about divine teachers simply romanticized humanity's gradual scientific development. Outside the settlement, wind moves softly through tall grass beneath moonlight. Dogs bark nervously whenever the strangers wander alone after dark. Some villagers whisper that the newcomers never seem fully asleep. Others insist they heard unfamiliar songs drifting from the hills before dawn. One scandalous aside spreads quietly among younger members of the community. A few villagers claim certain strangers possess unusual beauty beyond ordinary human appearance. Their voices sound strangely soothing. Their eyes seem reflective during firelight. Attraction begins complicating already fragile emotions. And where fascination grows, trust follows dangerously and fast. You continue observing daily life transforming around this mysterious knowledge exchange. Stone tools improve rapidly. Storage methods become more efficient. Hunting parties organize with surprising discipline. The settlement grows stronger within a single season. Yet something else changes too. Older traditions slowly weaken. Ancient rituals once performed beside sacred trees receive less attention now. Younger villagers increasingly seek answers from the strangers instead of tribal elders. Authority quietly shifts away from inherited wisdom towards specialized knowledge. The elders notice immediately. Research from Yale and Harvard confirms that technological or intellectual shifts often destabilize traditional leadership structures within early societies. Communities granting influence to skilled outsiders frequently experienced internal tension between established customs and emerging forms of expertise. Ancient myths may preserve emotional memories of these disruptive transitions. The settlement fire burns low while worried elders gather privately beneath a rough shelter woven from branches and animal hide. Their voices remain tense. One elderly woman warns that gifts always carry hidden costs. Another reminds listeners about ancient stories describing heavenly beings who once corrupted humanity through forbidden teachings. Nobody wants to sound fearful. Still, uncertainty spreads. For a moment, it feels as though the entire valley exists between two worlds. One world belongs to old rhythms shaped by survival memory and inherited tradition. The other promises advancement, discovery, and dangerous transformation. The strangers stand directly between both realities. You smell rain approaching from distant hills while younger villagers continue celebrating newfound prosperity. Harvests improve, hunting injuries decrease. Even disputes seem easier to resolve after the newcomers introduce unfamiliar forms of organized leadership and record keeping. But strange events continue accumulating around them. Several witnesses swear they saw one stranger standing motionless beneath heavy rainfall without reacting to cold or discomfort. Others describe hearing conversations in unknown languages late at night near isolated cliffs beyond the settlement. A hunter claims he followed glowing lights into nearby hills before losing all sense of time until sunrise. Scholars bicker endlessly over whether such accounts reflect deliberate myth-making or genuine psychological responses to unfamiliar authority figures. Researchers from Princeton suggest ancient communities encountering advanced cultures may have interpreted ordinary differences as supernatural qualities. Yet certain folklorists argue the emotional consistency across these stories deserves closer examination. The debate remains unresolved. Your thoughts drift toward a quieter truth hidden beneath these legends. Human beings desperately want guidance during uncertain ages. Whenever societies face fear, hunger, or rapid change, charismatic teachers often appear carrying promises of order and understanding. Ancient people were no different. Still, the stories surrounding the Watchers refuse to remain simple. Because eventually, according to many traditions, the heavenly teachers begin wanting more than influence. They grow attached to earthly pleasures. Mortal emotions tempt them away from distant responsibilities. Boundaries weaken slowly at first, then collapse entirely. You notice it now in the valley settlement. The strangers no longer behave like temporary visitors. They build private shelters near the cliffs overlooking the community. Certain villagers spend increasing amounts of time alone with them. Jealousies emerge. Rivalries deepen. Old customs fracture beneath unfamiliar desires. And every evening the newcomers continue studying the stars with unreadable expressions, as though waiting for something, or someone. The private shelters near the cliffs grow larger as summer heat settles heavily across the valley. You wake each morning to the smell of baked earth and wood smoke drifting through still air. Flies buzz lazily around grain baskets. Children run barefoot beside narrow streams while distant hammers or strike stone with rhythmic certainty. Civilization strengthens quietly here, yet peace becomes strangely fragile. The newcomers now hold enormous influence within the settlement. Villagers seek their approval before major decisions. Hunters imitate their techniques. Young people repeat their strange sayings beside nighttime fires. Even the elders who once distrusted them speak more cautiously now, as though fearful of losing relevance inside a changing world. But rumors move faster than authority. You hear whispers while women gather water at dawn. Strange sightings beyond the cliffs. Unusual births among nearby settlements. Livestock behaving wildly during moonlit nights. Stories spread unevenly distorted through fear and fascination alike. Then one traveller arrives carrying darker tales. He comes from distant communities beyond the northern hills, exhausted and sunburned beneath layers of road dust. His voice trembles while describing enormous figures wandering remote valleys after sunset. Creatures taller than ordinary men. Violent hunters possessing unnatural strength. Entire camps abandoned after terrifying encounters near forest edges. The listeners exchange nervous glances. Nobody says the word immediately, but everyone thinks it. Giants. Ancient traditions across several cultures describe giant offspring connected to unions between heavenly beings and humanity. Researchers from Oxford and Columbia note that legends about oversized warriors often emerged within societies experiencing conflict with physically imposing rival groups. Still, the persistence of giant myths across distant civilizations continues fueling scholarly fascination. The valley settlement grows restless afterward. You walk through crowded pathways, hearing fragments of anxious conversation carried beneath ordinary daily routines. Grain still requires grinding. Tools still need repair. Life continues despite rising fear. Yet something fundamental has shifted emotionally. The villagers no longer view the strangers simply as gifted teachers. Now they wonder whether hidden dangers arrived alongside forbidden knowledge. For a moment it feels as though the valley itself senses approaching trouble. Wind moves uneasily through tall grass. Birds scatter suddenly from nearby trees without obvious cause. Even the dogs remain alert during nighttime hours, growling softly toward the cliffs, where the newcomers built their shelters. One curious footnote preserved in ancient records claims giant figures represented uncontrolled power rather than literal beings. Historians from Stanford suggest such myths symbolized warrior elites whose dominance disrupted traditional social balance. Other scholars argue oral traditions may preserve exaggerated memories of unusually tall populations encountered during prehistoric migrations. No agreement has been reached, and perhaps uncertainty keeps the legends alive. You continue through this uneasy season, while harvest preparations begin across the settlement. Villagers work longer hours now because population growth demands greater food storage before winter arrives. The strangers assist occasionally, though they increasingly separate themselves from ordinary communal life. Their gatherings become more secretive. Fires burn late beside the cliffs. Sometimes strange sounds echo afterward. Metal striking stone, voices chanting rhythmically. Once just before dawn, several villagers swear they saw enormous silhouettes moving near the ridgeline against pale morning light. Nobody investigates closely. The fear feels too old somehow, as though humanity recognizes danger before fully understanding it. Ancient people lived close to instinct. Their survival depended upon noticing subtle threats quickly. A strange silence in nearby woods could mean predators approaching. Unfamiliar tracks near water sources might signal enemy tribes nearby. Or worse, you smell rain-soaked soil while storms gather across distant mountains. Lightning flashes silently beyond dark clouds illuminating the cliffs where the newcomers watch from above. Their expressions remain unreadable during these storms. Some villagers begin avoiding eye contact entirely. Records studied by researchers from Yale and Cambridge confirm that ancient societies frequently interpreted severe weather as evidence of divine displeasure connected to moral disorder. Myths linking forbidden relationships with natural catastrophe appear repeatedly throughout early civilizations. Such stories reinforced social boundaries while explaining unpredictable environmental disasters. Still, the emotional atmosphere surrounding these legends carries unusual intensity. You notice it during nighttime storytelling gatherings, where parents now warn children against wandering near the cliffs after sunset. The old tales grow sharper with each retelling. The Watchers were once heavenly observers, then teachers, then corruptors. Now their descendants allegedly walk among humanity carrying violence wherever they roam. And the stories keep growing darker. One scandalous aside spreading through the settlement claims several young villagers have disappeared after secretly visiting the cliff shelters. Some believe they left willingly. Others whisper about coercion, seduction, or stranger possibilities nobody wishes to describe openly beside children. Fear reshapes memory quickly. The strangers themselves deny nothing directly. That silence unsettles people more than open anger would. They continue teaching selected villagers advanced skills involving metallurgy, measurement, and celestial observation. Yet their lessons now feel transactional rather than generous. Knowledge demands loyalty. You walk beside a nervous hunter returning from distant forests after sunset. His hands shake while describing massive footprints discovered near a riverbank several miles north. Trees broken high above ordinary reach. Animal carcasses torn apart with disturbing force. He insists something enormous moved through the woods during heavy fog before dawn. The elders listen carefully this time. Arguments split among the settlement leadership afterward. Some demand the strangers leave immediately before disaster fully arrives. Others insist expelling them would destroy the community's newfound prosperity and protection. Younger villagers especially resist criticism because they admire the power and sophistication surrounding these mysterious teachers. Human nature rarely changes. People often defend dangerous influences when benefits arrive alongside warning signs. Research from Harvard and the University of Chicago demonstrates that rapidly changing societies frequently experience generational conflicts surrounding new technologies, beliefs, and authority structures. Ancient myths about corrupted heavenly knowledge may reflect emotional anxieties tied to social transformation itself. Outside storm clouds finally break. Rain crashes against the valley in heavy sheets while villagers secure shelters and protect stored grain from flooding. Thunder rolls continuously through surrounding hills. Lightning briefly illuminates the cliffs where several towering figures appear, standing motionless beside the strangers. The sight lasts only seconds, but enough people witness it. Panic spreads before sunrise. Families pack belongings hastily. Children cry while livestock scatter through muddy pathways. Some villagers prepare to flee south before conditions worsen further. Others barricade shelters using sharpened stakes and heavy stones. And above the chaos, the strangers remain calm. Too calm. Your thoughts drift toward the emotional core hidden inside these ancient giant legends. Perhaps they represent humanity's fear that certain forms of knowledge eventually grow beyond ordinary control. Innovations initially appearing miraculous can later produce violence, inequality, and instability impossible to contain. The giant offspring symbolize excess itself, power without restraint, wisdom corrupted into domination. As dawn finally rises through fading rain clouds, the valley settlement stands divided between awe and terror. Smoke rises weakly from soaked fires. Mud covers narrow pathways. Nervous villagers glance constantly toward the cliffs. Then a distant roar echoes across the hills. Deep, inhuman, and far too close. The roar rolls across the soaked hills like distant thunder trapped beneath the earth. Every villager freezes instantly. You hear water dripping from shelter roofs into muddy pathways. Somewhere nearby, frightened livestock strain against rope bindings while dogs bark wildly toward the northern cliffs. Nobody mistakes the sound for an animal. The valley settlement changes after that morning. Fear settles over daily life like cold mist refusing to lift. People work faster and speak quieter. Children no longer wander freely near forest edges. Night fires burn larger now surrounded by sharpened stakes, and nervous guards gripping polished spears with sleepless determination. Yet the strangers remain composed. Too composed. They continue teaching selected villagers while avoiding direct explanations regarding the towering figures glimpsed during storms. Their silence creates endless speculation. Some believe the newcomers control the giants. Others whisper that even the strangers fear what has emerged from the hills. Your mind drifts through tense evenings where smoke and rain scent the heavy air, while anxious conversations unfold beneath weak torchlight. The elders gather repeatedly, debating whether the settlement should abandon the valley entirely before greater disaster arrives. But leaving would mean surrendering everything. The stored grain, the strengthened shelters, the fertile land patiently transformed through years of labor. Civilization roots itself deeply once people begin depending upon permanent places. Walking away becomes emotionally unbearable. That hesitation proves costly. Ancient flood traditions appear in cultures across Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, and the Americas. Researchers from Oxford and Princeton suggest many of these stories preserve memories of real regional flooding events following the last ice age. Rising sea levels and catastrophic river floods likely shaped collective memory for generations. Yet scholars continue debating whether similarities between flood myths reflect shared historical experiences or symbolic storytelling patterns. The sky darkens again as weeks pass. Rain becomes relentless. Rivers swell beyond familiar boundaries, turning peaceful streams into violent currents, carrying uprooted trees downstream. Villagers reinforce embankments desperately using woven reed, stone barriers, mud packed by trembling hands. Every storm feels heavier than the last, and strange signs continue appearing. Bird migrations change unexpectedly. Fish float lifeless near riverbanks. Animals flee northern forests in unusual numbers. Even the strangers begin watching the horizon with visible concern, now exchanging hurried conversations beside their cliff shelters during nighttime hours. For a moment it feels as though nature itself has grown restless. You walk beside exhausted villagers hauling grain baskets toward higher ground, while thunder mutters constantly beyond thick clouds. The air smells of wet earth, smoke, and approaching disaster. Children cling silently to parents who can no longer pretend everything remains under control. One curious detail preserved within several ancient flood narratives describes heavenly beings regretting the chaos unleashed upon humanity before catastrophe arrives. Historians from Yale note that these stories often frame disasters as moral consequences tied to corruption, violence, and broken cosmic order. Still, arguments persist regarding whether flood myths primarily served religious purposes or preserved cultural trauma from actual environmental collapse. The river finally breaches its banks during midnight darkness. You hear the first screams above pounding rain. Water crashes through lower sections of the settlement with terrifying force, smashing storage pits and dragging wooden structures into roaring currents. Families stumble through mud carrying children tools and whatever supplies they can save. Torches vanish instantly beneath floodwater. Chaos spreads everywhere. The strangers emerge from the cliffs carrying lamps protected beneath heavy cloaks. Their calm movements contrast sharply against the panic consuming ordinary villagers. Several begin directing people toward elevated ground beyond the eastern ridge. But not everyone escapes. The water rises too quickly. Research from Stanford and Columbia confirms that ancient river valley civilizations frequently suffered devastating floods capable of destroying entire communities within hours. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia reveals repeated cycles of settlement collapse connected to severe environmental events. Such disasters naturally shaped spiritual beliefs and collective memory. Still living through catastrophe feels different than studying ruins centuries later. You struggle uphill beside desperate survivors while icy rain lashes exposed skin. The valley below disappears gradually beneath swirling brown water illuminated by flashes of lightning. Roofs collapse, animals drown, voices vanish abruptly into darkness, and through the storm enormous shapes move. Several witnesses later swear they saw towering figures wading through floodwater near the northern cliffs before disappearing completely beneath crashing waves. Others insist strange lights hovered above the valley, moments before the river burst its banks. Nobody fully agrees afterward. Trauma distorts memory, yet certain images remain painfully clear. An elderly woman clutching sacred carvings while floodwater tears through her shelter. A child screaming for missing parents beside overturned grain baskets. The strangers standing motionless against lightning flashes as though watching consequences unfold exactly as expected. One scandalous aside survives within later retellings of the disaster. Some survivors claimed the heavenly teachers possessed advance warning about the flood, yet revealed it only to chosen followers. Historians from Cambridge argue these accusations may reflect ordinary human resentment after catastrophe, especially toward elites perceived as protected during crisis. The storm continues for days. You shelter alongside exhausted survivors inside caves overlooking drowned lowlands. Fires burn weakly against damp stone walls. The smell of soaked clothing and fear fills the crowded darkness. Outside, endless rain pounds the earth while rivers consume everything familiar below. Civilization dissolves frighteningly fast. Without stable shelter, stored food, and organized systems, human communities return quickly toward desperate survival instincts. Old rivalries disappear temporarily beneath shared suffering. Even the strangers seem diminished now, quieter and more withdrawn than before. No agreement has been reached among modern scholars regarding whether flood myths symbolize divine judgment, natural disaster memory, or social collapse, anxiety. Researchers from Harvard continue examining how catastrophic events reshape cultural storytelling across generations. Yet emotionally, the ancient flood stories all share one haunting truth. Human beings suddenly realize their world could vanish overnight. You sit beside a dim fire listening to survivors recount missing relatives and destroyed homes while rainwater drips steadily from cave ceilings. Outside, thunder finally begins fading toward distant hills. Morning light gradually pushes through heavy clouds, revealing the transformed valley below. Nothing looks familiar anymore. Mud covers former pathways. Broken shelters float beside uprooted trees. Animal carcasses collect near flooded banks. The once thriving settlement has become silent wreckage beneath grey skies. And the strangers, several are gone. No footprints lead away from the caves. No bodies remain among flood debris. Only abandoned tools and strange carved symbols linger near their former shelters beside the cliffs. The survivors stare downward in exhausted silence. Some believe the Watchers returned to the heavens after bringing destruction upon humanity. Others suspect they simply fled before consequences fully arrived. A few insist they still wander somewhere beyond distant mountains, waiting patiently beside hidden fires for civilization to rise again. Because even after catastrophe, curiosity survives. Human beings rebuild. Stories survive longer than floods. And somewhere inside those stories, the memory of heavenly watchers continues watching quietly through the ages. The floodwaters withdraw slowly across the ruined valley, leaving behind silence thick as wet clay. You walk among exhausted survivors, stepping carefully through mud layered over shattered homes and broken tools. The air smells sour now, rotting wood, dead livestock, smoke from weak fires struggling against damp wind. Civilization feels wounded, yet people begin rebuilding almost immediately because human beings possess a stubborn instinct toward restoration. Shelters rise from debris, food stores are reorganized, children gather stones while adults repair damaged walls beside muddy riverbanks. Life pushes forward even after unbearable loss. But the stories change. Before the flood, the Watchers inspired fascination and dangerous admiration. Afterward, they become warnings, whispered beside nighttime fires. Survivors speak carefully now, lowering their voices whenever discussing the vanished strangers and the giant figures seen during storms. Memory hardens into caution. You sit beside elderly storytellers while evening darkness settles gently across the recovering settlement. Their faces glow orange beneath flickering flames. Rainwater still drips occasionally from damaged roofs overhead. One old woman traces patterns into damp soil while describing how knowledge itself can corrupt when placed into careless hands. The younger listeners remain silent. They have seen enough suffering recently to respect old fears. Records preserved by researchers from Oxford and Yale confirm that major disasters often reshape cultural narratives for generations afterward. Flood myths, divine punishment stories, and cautionary legends frequently emerge stronger after periods of environmental collapse. Scholars suggest communities use such narratives to impose meaning upon traumatic experiences otherwise too overwhelming to process. The survivors begin recording memories more deliberately now. Simple carvings appear first, marks scratched into stone or pressed into wet clay beside communal shelters, names of the missing, counts of stored grain, descriptions of unusual celestial events connected to the flood season. Human beings slowly realize memory alone cannot reliably protect knowledge across generations. Writing begins whispering into existence. For a moment, it feels as though humanity stands at another dangerous threshold. The same desire to preserve wisdom also risks preserving fear, superstition, and distorted accounts. Every storyteller reshapes events slightly. Every survivor remembers different details. Truth becomes slippery after catastrophe, yet certain images remain consistent. The heavenly strangers descending from distant hills, the rapid spread of forbidden knowledge, the towering figures glimpsed during storms, the flood swallowing everything afterward. A curious footnote found within several ancient traditions claims surviving scribes deliberately concealed portions of these stories from ordinary people. Historians from Cambridge suggest priestly elites often controlled literacy specifically to regulate dangerous or politically disruptive narratives. Still, scholars continue debating whether suppression actually protected social stability or simply strengthened forbidden legends over time. You continue walking through this recovering world while seasons pass slowly beyond the damaged valley. New children are born who never witnessed the flood directly. Crops return cautiously to repaired fields. Trade resumes between distant settlements connected by shared survival experiences. And with rebuilding comes organized religion. The survivors increasingly interpret catastrophe through spiritual frameworks emphasizing order, obedience, and sacred boundaries. Priests emerge gradually as intermediaries between frightened communities and unpredictable divine forces. Rituals become more structured. Sacred spaces grow more elaborate. Control over stories becomes power. You smell burning incense and dried herbs while early temple gatherings form beneath rough stone structures near the rebuilt riverbank. The atmosphere feels solemn now compared with earlier generations. Laughter fades quickly during discussions involving heavenly beings. The Watchers are no longer romantic figures carrying marvelous gifts. They represent dangerous rebellion. Research from Harvard and the University of Chicago confirms that post-disaster societies often strengthen religious authority and moral codes following periods of chaos. Communities recovering from collective trauma frequently emphasize obedience, purity, and social hierarchy as defenses against future collapse. Still, forbidden curiosity never disappears completely. Young scribes secretly compare flood accounts from neighboring settlements. Travelers exchange stories about mysterious teachers appearing elsewhere beyond distant mountains. Certain symbols connected to the vanished strangers continue resurfacing across trade routes and temple carvings alike. The memory refuses burial. One scandalous aside circulates quietly among apprentice scribes working inside temple storehouses. Some claim hidden tablets describe additional teachings received from the Watchers before the flood. Advanced astronomy, metallurgy, ritual formulas connected to dreams and celestial observation. The temple elders publicly deny such rumors. Their nervousness only deepens suspicion. You sit beside a weary record keeper scratching symbols carefully into soft clay beneath oil lamplight. His hands move slowly, deliberately aware that written words may survive long after flesh disappears into dust. Outside, distant thunder rolls harmlessly across far hills. Even ordinary storms still unsettle people now. The scribe pauses occasionally to glance toward the heavens, as though wondering whether unseen eyes continue watching humanity rebuild itself. No agreement exists among modern scholars regarding how ancient people distinguished history from myth inside early written records. Researchers from Stanford argue many civilizations viewed spiritual truth and historical memory as deeply interconnected rather than separate categories. Others believe priestly scribes intentionally blended symbolic narratives with real events to strengthen institutional authority. The debate stretches endlessly through universities and quiet libraries. Yet emotionally, the ancient survivors understood something modern societies sometimes forget. Knowledge carries responsibility. Certain discoveries reshape entire civilizations whether people feel prepared or not. You notice this anxiety spreading through the rebuilding communities. Metal tools improve harvests but also create deadlier weapons. Astronomical knowledge guides planting seasons yet encourages obsession with omens and celestial signs. Literacy preserves wisdom while concentrating power among educated elites. The gifts associated with the Watchers remain morally complicated, useful, dangerous, irresistible. Your mind drifts through narrow temple corridors smelling of wax smoke and damp stone, while priests organize growing collections of carved tablets. Some records celebrate divine protection during the flood. Others quietly warn against repeating humanity's earlier mistakes. Then one elderly priest reveals something unsettling to a trusted apprentice. Certain stories must never reach ordinary listeners. The apprentice asks why. The old priest studies the flickering lamp for several uneasy moments before answering softly, because people are drawn toward forbidden knowledge precisely when warned against it. Curiosity survives every disaster. Given enough time, humanity always seeks hidden doors again. Outside evening settles peacefully across the recovering valley. Crickets hum through tall grass beside rebuilt homes. Children sleep beneath patched blankets while tired parents rest after long days repairing irrigation channels and planting fresh crops. Life feels almost normal again, almost. Yet beneath this fragile stability, the memory of heavenly rebellion continues moving quietly through human imagination like underground water beneath stone. Scribes preserve fragments secretly. Priests debate dangerous interpretations behind closed doors. Travelers carry rumors farther each season, and somewhere beyond the known world, according to frightened whispers, other settlements have begun reporting strange visitors appearing beside remote hills under moonlit skies. Tall figures, calm voices, watchful eyes fixed upon the stars. The rumours travel faster than caravans. You hear them whispered beside market fires and river docks while rebuilt civilizations stretch cautiously across fertile valleys. Traders arriving from distant territories speak about mysterious teachers appearing among isolated tribes beyond desert routes and mountain passes. Their descriptions differ slightly, yet familiar patterns remain. Strangers carrying unusual knowledge, strangers watching the heavens, strangers changing societies wherever they settle. The world grows larger now. Generations have passed since the flood devastated the valley, and humanity no longer survives in scattered settlements alone. Cities rise beside powerful rivers. Stone walls surround crowded streets filled with merchants, priests, labourers, and soldiers. Temple towers climb toward the sky like deliberate attempts to reach forgotten heavens. Civilization feels ambitious again. You walk through one of these growing cities during early morning haze. Bakers prepare flat bread beside smoking ovens. Donkeys groan beneath loaded carts. Bronze tools flash beneath sunlight pouring between unfinished buildings. The air smells of sweat incense, hot clay and river mud warmed by rising heat. And above everything stands the temple. Priests control calendars, taxes, rituals, and sacred knowledge from shadowed chambers lined with carved records. Their authority depends partly upon preserving cosmic order within an unpredictable world. Floods, droughts, disease, and war still threaten every kingdom. People crave certainty wherever they can find it. That craving shapes the Watcher legends dramatically. Records examined by scholars from Oxford and Columbia confirm that expanding empires often absorbed older myths while reshaping them for political and religious purposes. Stories about rebellious heavenly beings became useful tools for explaining social disorder, legitimizing rulers and warning against dangerous ambition. The Watchers evolved from wandering teachers into symbols of forbidden rebellion against divine authority itself. You notice this transformation inside temple artwork, where ancient stories are carefully revised by official scribes. Earlier accounts describing mysterious knowledge now emphasize corruption and punishment instead. The giants become monstrous tyrants. The heavenly teachers become cautionary examples demonstrating what happens when sacred boundaries collapse. History bends beneath power. One curious footnote preserved within surviving tablets reveals disagreements even among ancient priests regarding how these stories should be interpreted. Some temple scholars believe the Watchers represented literal supernatural beings who once interfered directly with humanity. Others argued the legend symbolized arrogant kings or foreign invaders introducing disruptive customs into stable societies. Arguments echo quietly through candlelit halls. You drift deeper into the city where ordinary people discuss these matters very differently from educated elites. Labourers resting beside canals speak about the Watchers with nervous fascination rather than theological precision. Street storytellers exaggerate every detail for eager crowds. Children dare each other to wander near abandoned ruins after dark, searching for giant bones supposedly buried beneath shifting sand. Fear and entertainment blend easily. Research from Harvard and Stanford demonstrates that myths surrounding divine rebellion often become more elaborate during periods of political expansion and social inequality. Empires generate anxiety alongside prosperity. Ordinary citizens witnessing concentrated wealth and power naturally interpret authority through spiritual narratives involving pride, punishment, and corruption. The city and you reflects this tension constantly. Massive building projects consume endless labour. Soldiers patrol crowded streets carrying polished bronze weapons. Temple officials record taxes beside guarded storehouses overflowing with grain collected from distant villages. Civilization appears magnificent from a distance. Up-close exhaustion fills every corner. For a moment it feels as though humanity itself has become giant like the creatures from old legends. Cities devour forests for construction. Armies swallow entire populations into warfare. Kings demand monuments reaching impossibly toward heaven, and once again knowledge drives expansion faster than wisdom can restrain it. You smell heated metal while craftsmen demonstrate advanced bronze casting techniques introduced through expanding trade networks. Astronomy becomes increasingly sophisticated. Priests track planetary movement carefully from elevated temple rooftops. Written language spreads across administrative systems connecting enormous territories. The gifts associated with the Watchers now belong to empires. A council decree discovered near ancient Mesopotamian ruins proves certain rulers restricted astronomical and ritual knowledge to carefully trained priestly classes. Historians from Yale suggest control over specialized learning strengthened centralized authority, while preventing social unrest linked to forbidden practices. Still hidden traditions survive. You follow a nervous young scribe through narrow alleyways after sunset toward a private gathering beyond the city's official temple district. Oil lamps flicker behind shuttered windows. The smell of spiced wine and burning resin drifts softly through warm night air. Inside, small groups discuss forbidden interpretations of ancient stories. Some participants insist the Watchers were unfairly condemned by later religious authorities seeking absolute control over knowledge. Others believe humanity owes all civilization to these mysterious beings despite the disasters connected to them. A few quietly speculate that the heavenly teachers never truly vanished at all. Such conversations remain dangerous. Empires dislike uncontrolled ideas. One scandalous aside circulating among underground scholars claims several royal bloodlines secretly trace their ancestry to the Watchers themselves. These rumours flourish, especially during unstable political periods when rulers appear unusually cruel, brilliant, or charismatic. Researchers from Cambridge note that divine ancestry myths commonly emerged around powerful dynasties seeking legitimacy beyond ordinary human status. No agreement exists regarding whether people genuinely believe such claims, yet belief often matters less than emotional impact. You continue through the sprawling city while night deepens around crowded streets. Somewhere distant, musicians play soft reed instruments beneath balcony lanterns. Elsewhere, prisoners labour under guard, reinforcing defensive walls against rival kingdoms, gathering beyond desert frontiers. The empire feels strong, but underneath anxiety grows, because every civilization eventually fears the same possibility. What if advancement itself invites destruction? What if humanity repeatedly crosses boundaries it barely understands? The old flood stories remain alive precisely because they mirror these recurring fears. Scholars bicker constantly over whether the Watcher legends preserve historical memory, psychological symbolism, or purely religious mythology. Researchers from Princeton argue the stories reflect universal concerns regarding authority temptation and technological change. Others insist the unusual consistency across ancient cultures deserves deeper consideration. The debate survives because certainty remains impossible. You climb narrow temple stairs beside an aging astronomer carrying polished observation tools beneath his robes. Together you reach the rooftop where cool night wind moves gently across the sleeping city below. Above stretches a sky crowded with brilliant stars untouched by modern light pollution. The old astronomer studies the heavens silently for several moments. Then he speaks softly. Human beings always imagined someone watching from above because civilization itself feels fragile. Every empire believes it stands at the center of history. Every generation fears unseen judgment waiting beyond the stars. He gestures towards a distant constellation traced carefully across ancient records. The Watchers endure because humanity never stops wrestling with forbidden curiosity. Below the Empire sleeps uneasily beneath towering temples and guarded walls. Fires glow beside marketplaces. Priests protect sacred archives. Kings dream of eternal greatness. And somewhere beyond the city's edge, hidden travelers continue carrying old stories through darkness toward the next civilization waiting to hear them. The hidden travelers leave the Empire quietly before dawn, carrying rolled maps, sealed tablets, and stories too dangerous for official temples. You follow them across barren landscapes where cold wind sweeps dust through narrow canyons and forgotten roads. Their footsteps crunch softly over broken stone beneath fading starlight. Far behind the Empire sleeps beneath guarded walls. Ahead waits the desert. The travelers move carefully because wilderness strips away human certainty with unsettling efficiency. Cities create the illusion of permanence. Out here, beneath endless skies and shifting sand, people remember how small they truly are. Water decides survival. Distance distorts time, silence becomes almost physical, and silence changes the mind. For a moment it feels as though the desert itself watches you. Heat ripples across distant horizons during daylight hours. At night the cold bites sharply through layered cloth while constellations blaze overhead with terrifying clarity. Ancient wanderers often believed remote landscapes carried spiritual power, precisely because ordinary distractions disappeared there. Nothing protects you from your thoughts. Research from Oxford and Stanford confirms that deserts and isolated wilderness regions frequently shape the development of mystical traditions across ancient civilizations. Sensory deprivation, harsh environmental conditions, and prolonged solitude influenced religious visions, meditation practices, and supernatural beliefs among travelers and hermits alike. The travelers eventually reach a cluster of caves hidden within black volcanic cliffs beyond common trade routes. Smoke drifts faintly from narrow openings above weathered stone steps. You smell burning herbs and old parchment before hearing human voices. Mystics live here, not priests serving empires or kings controlling armies. These people abandon crowded cities searching for hidden truth beyond political authority. Some study sacred texts endlessly. Others fast for days beneath the stars seeking visions. A few claim dreams reveal secrets forgotten since the age of the Watchers. Their appearance unsettles ordinary visitors. Thin bodies wrapped in rough cloth, eyes sharpened by isolation, hands stained with ink and candle soot. Yet their quiet confidence carries strange magnetism. They speak softly as though afraid loud voices might disturb invisible listeners lingering nearby. One elderly mystic welcomes the travelers into a cavern lined with carefully preserved manuscripts. Oil lamps flicker against damp walls covered in faded markings resembling constellations and winged figures. The atmosphere smells of wax smoke, dry herbs, and ancient leather. Knowledge hides here deliberately. A curious detail recorded by researchers from Yale and Cambridge reveals that many ancient mystical communities preserved controversial writings rejected by mainstream religious authorities. Desert monasteries and isolated cave settlements often became repositories for forbidden traditions, alternative interpretations, and politically dangerous ideas. The mystics discussed the Watchers openly, not with fear exactly, with fascination. You sit beside them while cool desert wind hums softly beyond the cave entrance. One scholar unrolls a fragile manuscript describing heavenly beings descending to humanity before the flood. Another argues the stories symbolize spiritual awakening, corrupted by earthly temptation. A third insists the Watchers still communicate indirectly through dreams and celestial signs. Nobody fully agrees. That disagreement feels strangely peaceful compared with the rigid certainty dominating imperial temples. The desert encourages questions. One scandalous aside, shared quietly among younger mystics, claims certain hidden rituals can recreate the visions experienced by ancient prophets who encountered heavenly beings. Historians from Harvard suggest such practices may have involved extended fasting, sensory isolation, rhythmic chanting, or herbal substances influencing perception. Still no agreement exists regarding how ancient visionaries themselves interpreted these experiences. The debate stretches endlessly between psychology, spirituality, and cultural symbolism. You continue through long evenings inside the cave community, while scholars copy fragile texts beneath trembling lamplight. Outside, stars burn above endless desert darkness. Occasionally someone climbs the cliffs alone to meditate until sunrise, while cold wind sweeps across silent stone. The atmosphere feels suspended outside ordinary time. These mystics believe civilization distracts humanity from deeper truths. Cities create noise. Wealth creates attachment. Power creates corruption. Only isolation strips away illusion enough for genuine understanding to emerge. And naturally, the Watcher legends fit perfectly into that worldview. The heavenly beings become symbols of hidden wisdom, lost beneath material ambition and political control. Their downfall represents the danger of mixing spiritual power with earthly desire. Humanity's repeated collapses reflect failure to balance knowledge and restraint. Research from Princeton and the University of Chicago confirms that mystical traditions often reinterpret older myths psychologically rather than literally. Stories once viewed as historical events gradually transform into symbolic maps describing inner human struggle. Yet some mystics resist symbolic explanations entirely. You notice this tension during heated nighttime debates echoing through narrow stone chambers. One elderly teacher insists ancient accounts should be understood exactly as written. The Watchers were real beings who interacted directly with humanity before catastrophic punishment followed. Another scholar disagrees sharply. He argues literal obsession misses the deeper lesson. The true danger lies not in supernatural visitors, but in humanity's endless hunger for power disguised as enlightenment. Their argument continues for hours. Outside, desert winds carry sand against the cave walls with soft scratching sounds like distant whispers. You wander briefly beyond the settlement before dawn, climbing a narrow ridge overlooking endless empty wilderness. The air feels freezing and perfectly still. Far above, constellations stretch across the sky with overwhelming brightness, untouched by modern civilization. Then you notice someone standing nearby. A solitary mystic wrapped in dark cloth staring upwards silently. Without looking away from the heavens, he asks a simple question. Why do these stories survive so stubbornly across centuries? You consider the question carefully, perhaps because humanity secretly fears knowledge arriving faster than wisdom. Perhaps because every generation encounters people who seem almost beyond ordinary understanding. Or perhaps because loneliness itself encourages belief that unseen intelligences watch from beyond familiar reality. The mystic smiles faintly. Then he shares something unsettling. Several travelers recently arrived from Eastern kingdoms carrying reports about strange teachers appearing again among isolated settlements. The descriptions sound painfully familiar. Unusual knowledge, celestial obsession, charismatic outsiders gathering devoted followers. The old patterns continue repeating. Scholars bicker over whether recurring heavenly teacher myths reflect archetypal psychology or persistent cultural memory transmitted across generations. Researchers from Columbia suggest such legends adapt continuously because they mirror universal anxieties surrounding authority, temptation, and transformation. Whatever the explanation, the stories refuse extinction. Morning finally approaches across the desert. Pale light spreads slowly over black cliffs and silent dunes, while exhausted mystics extinguish oil lamps after another sleepless night preserving forbidden texts and debating ancient mysteries. The Empire far behind believes it controls history through official records and sacred decrees, but here hidden beneath desert's stone-quieter voices continue preserving older possibilities. And somewhere beyond the horizon, according to restless whispers carried through caravan routes and lonely dreams, the Watchers may not be finished with humanity yet. The whispers leaving the desert caves travel slowly along caravan roads toward crowded temple cities where incense thickens the air and authority rests behind polished stone walls. You arrive beside one of these great religious centres during late afternoon, while bronze bells echo across sunlit courtyards. The temple dominates everything. Massive columns rise toward painted ceilings covered with stars, winged figures, and scenes of divine judgment. Priests move through shaded corridors carrying scrolls, ceremonial oils, and carefully guarded secrets. Outside the gates, ordinary people kneel beneath heat and dust, hoping for blessings, healing, or protection against another season of uncertainty. Power feels organized here. Unlike the wandering mystics hidden within lonely caves, temple authorities believe truth requires structure. Rules preserve stability. Ritual preserves cosmic order. Knowledge belongs within disciplined hands, not scattered among curious crowds vulnerable to dangerous ideas. Naturally, the Watcher legends become tightly controlled. You smell wax smoke and crushed cedar while senior priests gather inside a private chamber lined with sacred records. Their robes rustle softly against polished floors. One elderly archivist carefully unrolls an ancient manuscript describing heavenly beings descending before the flood generations long ago. The younger priests watch nervously. Because these texts remain controversial even within the temple itself, records studied by researchers from Harvard and Oxford confirm that priestly institutions across ancient civilizations frequently restricted access to spiritually sensitive material. Specialized knowledge surrounding cosmology, prophecy, and divine rebellion often remained limited to educated elites trained within formal religious hierarchies. Control protects authority, yet forbidden stories always attract attention precisely because they remain hidden. You continue through dim archive rooms where scribes copy official histories beneath flickering oil lamps. Their hands move carefully across parchment, while guards stand nearby ensuring no unauthorized texts disappear into curious pockets. The atmosphere feels tense despite outward calm. Certain manuscripts remain locked away entirely. One curious footnote preserved by historians from Cambridge describes temple disputes over whether ancient Watcher traditions should be destroyed or preserved under strict supervision. Some religious leaders feared these stories encouraged rebellion against divine order. Others argued suppressing them completely risked losing important spiritual warnings from humanity's earliest ages. The compromise becomes secrecy. Ordinary worshippers hear simplified versions emphasizing obedience and punishment. The deeper debates remain hidden behind temple walls where educated scholars argue endlessly over interpretation. You walk beside a young apprentice carrying clay tablets through narrow corridors scented with ink and drying reeds. He whispers that older priests still study celestial signs connected to the ancient heavenly beings, despite publicly condemning such fascination. Certain constellations receive special attention during winter months. Unusual astronomical events prompt private ceremonies closed to outsiders. The contradictions feel deeply human. Public certainty, private curiosity, one scandalous aside, circulates quietly among lower-ranking temple workers. Some claim several high priests secretly believe the Watchers possess genuine divine knowledge lost after the flood. According to rumor, hidden chambers beneath the temple contain forbidden writings describing advanced astronomy healing practices and rituals connected to dreams. Nobody openly confirms these stories. That silence only strengthens belief. Research from Stanford and Yale demonstrates that restricted information often acquires exaggerated mystique within hierarchical societies. Human beings naturally imagine hidden knowledge as more powerful than openly shared wisdom, especially when authority figures appear unusually protective or secretive. Night settles gradually across the temple complex. You hear sandals scraping stone passageways, while evening prayers echo through candlelit halls. Outside, market noise fades beneath cooling darkness. Inside the archives, however, debate continues. A council of senior scholars gathers around a low wooden table covered with manuscripts copied from older civilizations destroyed centuries earlier. Their discussion focuses upon one troubling question. Were the Watchers truly evil? The room grows quiet afterward. Several priests insist the answer seems obvious. The heavenly beings introduced corruption, violence, and chaos before catastrophic judgment followed. Humanity suffered because sacred boundaries were violated. Yet one elderly scholar disagrees carefully. Without the forbidden teachings, he argues civilization itself might never have advanced beyond scattered tribes fearing storms and darkness. Writing, astronomy, metalworking, organized law. Many ancient traditions credit these developments to the mysterious teachers. The implication unsettles everyone present. Perhaps the Watchers brought both progress and destruction simultaneously. No agreement has been reached among modern scholars regarding why ancient myths so often connect knowledge with moral danger. Researchers from Princeton suggest early societies viewed technological advancement ambivalently, because innovation disrupted stable traditions while creating new inequalities and conflicts. The debate remains painfully relevant. You drift through temple gardens afterward where cool fountains soften the heavy desert heat, lingering in stone walls. Jasmine and myrrh scent the night air. Above, stars shine between towering columns while distant chanting fades into silence. For a moment, it feels as though the temple itself exists between worlds. Part sanctuary, part prison, the priests guarding sacred secrets understand something uncomfortable. Human beings crave certainty publicly while privately longing for forbidden possibilities. The Watcher legends survive because they satisfy both impulses simultaneously. They warn against dangerous ambition while tempting listeners toward hidden wisdom. That tension keeps the stories alive. You notice it clearly during a midnight ritual conducted inside the highest observatory tower. Only selected scholars attend. Bronze instruments glimmer beneath torchlight while astronomers track planetary movement across carefully mapped charts. One elderly observer pauses suddenly. A strange light moves briefly across the northern sky before disappearing beyond distant mountains. The room falls silent. Several priests exchange uneasy glances because old prophecies associate wandering celestial lights with returning heavenly messengers. Others dismiss the sight immediately as ordinary atmospheric illusion or distant fear. Still nobody resumes speaking comfortably afterward. Scholars from Columbia and the University of Chicago continued debating how astronomical phenomena influenced ancient supernatural beliefs. Comets, meteors, eclipses, and unusual planetary alignments often carried profound spiritual meaning within pre-modern societies lacking scientific explanations for celestial irregularities. Yet emotional interpretation matters as much as factual explanation. The priests watching the northern sky tonight feel genuine unease, regardless of what actually crossed the darkness above. You descend from the observatory near dawn while cool wind moves through empty temple corridors. Most worshippers still sleep beyond the city walls. Only scribes and guards remain awake, protecting archives filled with fragile memory stretching back through floods, empires and vanished civilizations. Inside locked chambers, the oldest texts continue waiting patiently. Stories about heavenly watchers, forbidden knowledge, giants walking beside terrified humanity, and somewhere beyond official doctrine and guarded silence, ordinary people continue wondering whether the ancient teachers truly disappeared at all. Ordinary people continue wondering because silence rarely destroys mystery, it only deepens it. You feel this restless curiosity while traveling beyond the temple city into crowded Ports Mountain villages and dusty crossroads where storytellers trade rumors beside cooking fires. Generations keep passing. Empires rise confidently, then weaken beneath corruption, war, and disease. Yet the stories about heavenly beings refuse disappearance. Instead, they adapt. Every civilization reshapes them according to its fears and ambitions. Some communities portray the Watchers as wicked corruptors. Others remember them almost fondly as bringers of wisdom unfairly condemned. Human memory bends easily around desire. You arrive in a growing centre of learning, where philosophers, scribes and historians gather beneath shaded courtyards discussing ancient records collected from across distant kingdoms. Scrolls line wooden shelves, ink stains every table. The air smells of dust lamp oil and drying parchment warmed beneath afternoon sunlight. Unlike temple priests, these scholars ask dangerous questions openly. Did the Watchers truly exist? Were the flood stories exaggerated memories of natural disaster? Could the giant legends describe powerful warrior clans later transformed into myth? Debate fills the halls endlessly. Research from Oxford and Harvard confirms that ancient historians often struggled separating inherited mythology from factual memory. Early scholarly traditions attempted rational explanations for supernatural stories while still respecting their cultural importance. This tension shaped historical writing across many civilizations. You sit quietly beside a heated discussion unfolding between two respected thinkers. One insists the Watcher stories emerged from encounters with unusually advanced travelers entering isolated regions during prehistoric times. Superior technology appeared miraculous to frightened communities unfamiliar with metalworking, astronomy, or organized governance. The other scholar disagrees sharply. He argues such explanations miss the emotional depth embedded within the myths. The stories survive not because they record literal events, but because they express permanent truths about temptation, ambition, and humanity's dangerous relationship with power. Neither convinces the other. That uncertainty fascinates everyone listening. One curious footnote preserved in surviving commentaries reveals certain ancient intellectuals openly mocked literal belief in giant offspring and descending heavenly beings. Historians from Yale note that skepticism existed even within deeply religious societies. Rational inquiry and spiritual belief often coexisted uneasily, rather than replacing one another completely. You continue wandering through lecture gatherings where arguments stretch long into candle-lit evenings. Some scholars analyze flood sediment and ancient ruins, searching for physical evidence, supporting old catastrophes. Others compare myths across cultures, hoping to uncover shared origins beneath centuries of adaptation. Patterns emerge repeatedly: heavenly teachers, forbidden knowledge, moral collapse, catastrophic judgment. The recurrence itself becomes impossible to ignore. Research from Stanford and Cambridge demonstrates that human societies independently develop remarkably similar mythological themes when confronting universal experiences such as environmental disaster, political instability, and technological change. Yet some researchers argue the extraordinary consistency surrounding certain ancient traditions remains difficult to explain entirely through coincidence. The debate grows more intense with every generation. You walk beside a thoughtful historian carrying weathered manuscripts through narrow stone streets after sunset. Rain taps gently against rooftops while distant musicians play slow melodies from crowded taverns nearby. The scholar speaks carefully, aware certain opinions remain politically dangerous. Perhaps he says quietly humanity keeps inventing Watcher stories because people fear intelligence without compassion. The idea lingers heavily. Ancient heavenly beings become symbols for the brilliant forces disconnected from ordinary human suffering. Their knowledge transforms civilization yet also destabilizes it. They teach humanity how to build, calculate, and conquer without teaching restraint equally well. The historian stops beneath a flickering lantern. Look at every empire, he murmurs. Advancement arrives faster than wisdom. You notice exhaustion behind his eyes. A council record examined by researchers from Princeton confirms several ancient philosophers warned that rapid intellectual progress could undermine moral stability within expanding societies. Concerns about corruption linked to specialized knowledge appeared repeatedly throughout classical literature and political theory. Some anxieties never age. One scandalous aside circulating among younger scholars claims secret societies preserve hidden Watcher teachings beneath major cities and royal courts. These rumors describe underground groups studying forbidden astronomy, ritual practices, and ancient manuscripts unavailable to ordinary citizens. Most educated historians dismiss such tales publicly. Privately, many remain curious. Because scholars are still human beings, you drift into a crowded symposium where wealthy patrons sponsor debates about the oldest mysteries haunting civilization. Candles flicker across polished cups filled with spiced wine. Philosophers gesture passionately while listeners argue over evident symbolism and divine possibility. One speaker proposes a startling theory. The Watchers, he claims, represent humanity's first awareness that knowledge creates inequality. Before advanced skills emerged, survival depended mainly upon physical endurance and shared labor. But once specialized learning appeared, societies divided sharply between those controlling information and those obeying it. The room grows thoughtful afterward. Research from Columbia and the University of Chicago supports the idea that literacy, astronomy, and administrative knowledge dramatically reshaped ancient power structures. Control over information became essential for governing large populations, collecting taxes, organizing armies, and maintaining religious authority. Knowledge became political. The old myths understood this instinctively. Outside, thunder rolls softly beyond distant hills while rain darkens empty streets. You leave the symposium beside several younger scholars still debating fiercely under shared cloaks. Their conversation drifts toward deeper uncertainty. What if the Watchers were neither gods nor ordinary humans? What if they represented something stranger entirely? No agreement emerges, and perhaps none ever will. That uncertainty keeps the legends emotionally alive across centuries. Definitive answers would shrink the mystery into manageable shape. Instead, the stories remain fluid enough for every generation to reinterpret according to contemporary fears. For ancient tribes, the Watchers explained unfamiliar knowledge arriving suddenly from beyond known horizons. For temple priests, they warned against rebellion and moral corruption. For philosophers, they became symbols of dangerous ambition and intellectual pride. And for ordinary people listening beside nighttime fires, they remained unsettling possibilities waiting beyond darkness. You climb a quiet hill overlooking the sleeping city while clouds slowly break apart above. Cool wind brushes across wet stone. Far below, torchlight glows softly along winding streets where merchants, priests, labourers, and scholars dream beneath the same uncertain sky. The stars return gradually overhead. Ancient observers once studied these same constellations, searching for signs of heavenly intention. Modern scholars analyze surviving texts, searching for historical truth hidden beneath mythology. Both groups stare upward, asking similar questions. Who watches humanity? What knowledge should remain forbidden? And why do stories about fallen teachers continue haunting civilization long after the empires preserving them have turned completely into dust? The empires eventually crumble into dust exactly as the old historian predicted. You feel centuries sliding past like drifting sand while roads crack, temples collapse, and once powerful kingdoms fade into scattered ruins, visited only by wandering shepherds and curious travelers. But the stories survive. They survive because a fear survives. Now the world changes again. Massive stone cathedrals rise across cold landscapes where rain lashes narrow streets, and bells echo through grey morning fog. You walk beneath towering arches while candle smoke curls upward into darkness high above. The air smells of wet wool wax incense and old stone soaked by countless winters. The age feels anxious. People whisper constantly about hidden evil moving through forests, storms, and lonely crossroads after sunset. Illness sweeps through crowded towns without explanation. Harvests fail unexpectedly. War returns again and again across exhausted kingdoms. And somewhere within this fearful atmosphere, the Watchers reappear in altered form. Church scholars debate ancient heavenly rebellions using carefully translated texts preserved through generations of copying and reinterpretation. Some describe fallen beings teaching forbidden arts before divine punishment shattered the world. Others emphasize temptation, pride, and corruption spreading through vulnerable humanity. The details shift. The emotional core remains unchanged. Research from Oxford and Yale confirms that medieval religious culture often blended older mythological traditions with newer theological frameworks. Stories involving rebellious heavenly beings became powerful teaching tools during periods marked by political instability, plague, and widespread superstition. Fear gives legends fresh life. You continue through narrow medieval streets where rainwater slides between uneven stones and merchants hurry beneath heavy cloaks before approaching nightfall. Ordinary people rarely read sacred texts themselves. Instead, they hear fragments through sermons, songs, and rumours spreading from village to village. That distance encourages imagination. One curious footnote preserved by historians from Cambridge reveals that certain medieval communities believed fallen heavenly beings still wandered physically through remote wilderness, disguised as travellers, nobles, or wandering scholars. Unusual intelligence or charisma sometimes inspired suspicion rather than admiration. Knowledge itself could appear threatening. You step inside a crowded tavern glowing warmly against freezing rain outside. Farmers and traders gather beside crackling fires, while an elderly storyteller describes ancient giants destroyed before the Great Flood. His audience listens nervously between cups of heated wine. The storyteller lowers his voice dramatically. The watchers, he whispers, taught humanity more than metalworking and astronomy. They revealed hidden methods for manipulating power itself. Kings learned conquest, priests learned control, scholars learned dangerous curiosity, and humanity never recovered fully afterward. Several listeners cross themselves uneasily, others lean closer. Research from Harvard and Stanford demonstrates that medieval societies often interpreted intellectual ambition suspiciously, especially when associated with unconventional learning outside established religious authority. Individuals studying astronomy, alchemy, or foreign texts sometimes attracted accusations of spiritual corruption. The old tension survives once again. Knowledge inspires both admiration and fear. You leave the tavern after midnight, while cold mist drifts through silent streets beneath pale moonlight. Somewhere distant, cathedral bells mark another passing hour. Dogs bark nervously beyond shuttered homes. The city feels deeply asleep and strangely watchful at the same time. Then you notice movement near the old cemetery wall. A solitary monk carries hidden manuscripts beneath his cloak while hurrying towards the monastery beyond town. His footsteps splash softly through puddles. Curiosity pulls you after him through winding alleys scented with smoke and rain-soaked wood. Inside the monastery, candlelight flickers across endless shelves filled with hand-copied books preserved through generations of careful labour. The atmosphere feels calm compared with the fearful city outside. Yet even here anxiety lingers beneath disciplined silence. Certain texts remain locked away. The monk eventually reveals several fragile manuscripts discussing ancient heavenly rebellions far more extensively than public sermons ever acknowledge. Their pages describe descending beings, forbidden teachings, and catastrophic punishment with unsettling detail. One scandalous aside claims some medieval scholars secretly believed fragments of Watcher knowledge survived within royal courts and hidden societies across Europe. Historians from Princeton note that conspiracy theories surrounding forbidden wisdom often flourished during periods of social uncertainty and centralized religious control. No agreement existed even within monasteries regarding these controversial writings. Some monks viewed them as dangerous distractions encouraging spiritual pride. Others considered them essential warnings about humanity's recurring weaknesses. You sit beside the monk while rain rattles softly against stained glass windows overhead. He explains that church authorities fear ordinary people misunderstanding such stories literally. Superstition already dominates too many frightened minds. Public obsession with fallen heavenly beings could easily spiral into panic or heresy. Yet suppressing the text entirely feels wrong, too. The ancient stories contain important truths regardless of historical accuracy. About ambition, temptation, the corrupting influence of power detached from wisdom. Research from Columbia and the University of Chicago confirms that medieval theologians frequently interpreted ancient supernatural narratives symbolically, while acknowledging their emotional influence upon popular culture. Official doctrine often differed sharply from ordinary folk belief. Outside the monastery walls, however, fear grows darker with every difficult season. Plague eventually arrives. You watch black carts rolling through narrow streets while bells toll endlessly beneath grey skies. Entire households vanish within days. Priests struggle explaining such suffering despite constant prayer and ritual. In desperate times, people search urgently for hidden causes behind catastrophe. Naturally, old legends return again. Some claim humanity suffers punishment for repeating ancient sins associated with forbidden knowledge and moral corruption. Others whisper that fallen heavenly beings still influence earthly affairs from hidden places beyond ordinary sight. The fear becomes contagious. A council decree preserved in medieval archives proves certain religious authorities actively condemned unauthorized mystical practices connected to angelic communication, astrology, and secret revelation. Researchers from Stanford argue institutional crackdowns often intensified fascination with prohibited subjects rather than eliminating them. Human curiosity rarely obeys commands. You wander beyond the plague-ridden city toward quiet countryside where isolated villages survive beside dark forests and abandoned ruins. Winter wind moves through leafless trees with whispering sounds almost resembling distant voices. For a moment, it feels as though the entire age exists beneath invisible pressure. Civilization fears collapse again. The old flood anxieties return in new forms. Instead of rising water, disease and warfare threaten social order. Instead of wandering, giants' ambitious rulers devour neighboring kingdoms through endless conflict. And still the Watchers linger within cultural memory, not as clear historical figures anymore, as shadows, warnings, symbols haunting candlelit imagination whenever humanity senses danger approaching from both heaven and within itself. Above the frozen countryside, stars emerge slowly through drifting clouds, while monastery bells echo faintly across the darkness. Ancient observers once feared heavenly beings descending from those distant lights. Now medieval souls fear something equally unsettling, that humanity may already carry the corruption inside itself. Humanity may already carry the corruption inside itself. The thought follows you through freezing Katowice scenes, where candlelight flickers across monastery walls and hidden manuscripts pass carefully between trembling hands. Outside kingdoms wage endless wars beneath grey skies. Inside isolated libraries, quieter battles unfold over memory itself. The forbidden texts survive because someone always chooses preservation over destruction. You arrive at a remote monastery perched high among snow-covered hills where winter wind groans through ancient stone corridors. The journey feels endless. Ice crunches beneath boots. Pine smoke drifts from distant chimneys barely visible through heavy fog. Ravens circle silently above dark forests surrounding the isolated sanctuary. Few visitors come here willingly. That isolation protects secrets. Research from Oxford and Cambridge confirms that monasteries preserved enormous portions of ancient literature throughout unstable medieval centuries. Remote religious communities copied manuscripts by hand, often saving controversial works alongside officially approved texts despite political and theological risks. The monks greet travellers politely but cautiously. You notice how carefully they study unfamiliar faces before granting entry beyond the outer courtyard. Fear shapes behaviour during uncertain ages. Raiders, disease, and religious persecution move unpredictably across the fractured world beyond monastery walls. Inside, however, another atmosphere emerges entirely. Warm candlelight glows across towering shelves packed with leather-bound manuscripts. Ink stains cover wooden tables where exhausted scribes labour silently beneath heavy wool robes. The air smells of parchment, melted wax dust, and dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams. Knowledge breathes quietly here. One elderly librarian guides you through narrow archive passages toward a locked chamber, hidden beneath the main library floor. His lantern throws trembling shadows against rough stone, while distant bells echo faintly overhead. Certain books remain hidden intentionally. The librarian explains that generations earlier, church authorities ordered destruction of several writings discussing heavenly rebellion and forbidden teachings too openly. Some monasteries obeyed completely. Others secretly preserved copies believing future scholars deserved access to humanity's full intellectual inheritance. That choice carried danger. One curious footnote uncovered by researchers from Yale reveals that medieval monks occasionally concealed controversial manuscripts inside walls beneath floors or within sealed chests to protect them from confiscation during religious purges. Fear of censorship shaped how knowledge physically survived across centuries. The hidden chamber contains exactly such treasures, fragile texts copied repeatedly by nervous hands through countless generations. Some pages discuss ancient flood traditions, others describe celestial beings teaching humanity forbidden arts before catastrophic punishment followed. Marginal notes written by long-dead scholars debate whether these stories should be interpreted literally, symbolically, or politically. Or, arguments survive longer than empires. You sit beside the librarian while snow taps softly against underground window slits. He confesses something quietly. Many monks privately doubt official explanations regarding certain ancient legends. The emotional force surrounding the Watcher stories feels too persistent to dismiss entirely as simple superstition. Yet certainty remains impossible. Research from Harvard and Princeton demonstrates that medieval intellectual culture contained far more diversity and skepticism than modern stereotypes often suggest. Monastic scholars actively debated theology, natural philosophy, history, and mythology, using surprisingly analytical methods for their era. Still, fear never disappears completely. One scandalous aside circulating among younger monks claims certain hidden texts describe surviving descendants of the Watchers living secretly among noble families and royal courts. Historians from Stanford note that medieval conspiracy narratives frequently linked political corruption with supernatural ancestry during periods of social instability. Most educated monks reject such claims publicly. Privately, curiosity lingers, because forbidden possibilities tempt the human imagination powerfully, especially during long winters inside isolated libraries where ancient words seem almost alive beneath flickering candlelight. You continue wandering through the monastery during deep nighttime silence. Wind rattles shutters. Snow gathers heavily across quiet courtyards. Somewhere distant, a monk chants prayers alone inside the chapel, while others sleep beneath rough blankets after exhausting hours copying manuscripts. Then you discover another hidden room. This chamber feels different immediately. Not scholarly. Secretive. Astronomical charts cover the walls beside strange diagrams resembling constellations and winged figures descending from stars. Bronze instruments rest upon wooden tables beside carefully preserved scrolls written in several ancient languages. The monastery studies the heavens privately. A younger monk catches you examining the room and hesitates before speaking. Certain abbots, he explains cautiously, believed ancient heavenly encounters may have involved misunderstood natural phenomena connected to astronomy. Comets, meteors, unusual planetary alignments. Perhaps frightened ancient people transformed rare celestial events into supernatural narratives over generations. The explanation sounds rational. Incomplete too. No agreement has been reached among modern scholars regarding why celestial imagery appears so consistently within myths involving divine beings and forbidden knowledge. Researchers from Columbia suggest ancient sky observation profoundly shaped religious imagination, because astronomical cycles governed agriculture, navigation, and political authority alike. The heavens inspired both science and fear simultaneously. You notice handwritten notes scattered across the observatory table comparing recent celestial sightings with descriptions found in ancient Watcher traditions. Certain monks clearly search for recurring patterns linking historical upheaval with unusual astronomical events. Human beings crave connection between chaos and meaning. Out to side that the storm intensifies. Snow hammers against monastery walls while freezing wind howls through distant corridors. The atmosphere feels suspended beyond ordinary time, as though the isolated sanctuary exists halfway between earthly reality and dream. The younger monk eventually shares something deeply unsettling. Several months earlier, travelers arrived carrying rumors from Eastern territories about mysterious scholars gathering followers through claims of hidden heavenly wisdom. These wandering teachers reportedly possessed unusual astronomical knowledge and spoke obsessively about humanity approaching another great transformation. The old patterns return once again. Knowledge. Charisma. Promises of secret understanding unavailable to ordinary people. Research from the University of Chicago confirms that apocalyptic movements and mystical teacher figures often emerge during periods of widespread uncertainty, especially when societies experience political fragmentation, environmental stress, or rapid cultural change. History repeats emotionally even when details change. You climb the monastery tower before dawn while snow finally begins easing across silent hills. The world below appears untouched beneath pale white light. Forests stretch endlessly toward distant mountains hidden behind morning mist. Above, the stars slowly fade. For a moment, it feels impossible to separate spirituality from psychology completely. Ancient people staring upward during lonely nights naturally imagined intelligence beyond themselves. Isolation sharpens imagination. Fear amplifies mystery. Hope creates visions. Yet the Watcher legends survive with unusual persistence. The librarian joins you quietly beside the frozen tower wall. Perhaps he says softly, humanity keeps preserving these forbidden stories because they remind people that knowledge alone never guarantees wisdom. Below, hidden manuscripts wait patiently beneath stone floors, while kingdoms continue rising and collapsing beyond snowy horizons. And somewhere beyond the fading stars, according to restless imagination and stubborn legend alike, unseen watchers may still be observing humanity's endless struggle with temptation, ambition, and truth. The hidden manuscripts survive the winter centuries exactly as the old librarian hoped. Ink fades slowly. Empires change names. Kings die beneath elaborate tombs. Yet fragile pages continue passing from careful hands to curious minds, while Europe awakens into a new age of restless ambition. The world begins opening again. You feel it immediately while entering bustling Renaissance cities where merchants crowd canal bridges and artists sketch impossible ideas beneath bright afternoon light. Printing presses clatter through narrow workshops. Scholars argue loudly inside crowded universities. Ships arrive daily carrying unfamiliar goods maps and ancient texts recovered from distant lands. Curiosity becomes fashionable now, and curiosity always resurrects forbidden stories. The old Watcher legends emerge once more from monastery shadows into public conversation. Humanists, artists, astronomers, and theologians rediscover ancient writings preserved through centuries of careful copying. Some approach the texts academically, others read them with nervous fascination. Either way, silence breaks. Research from Oxford and Harvard confirms that Renaissance intellectual culture revived widespread interest in ancient mythology, astronomy, and controversial religious writings previously restricted within monastic libraries. Expanding literacy and printing technology transformed access to knowledge dramatically across Europe. Ideas spread faster than authorities can control them. You walk through a crowded book market where newly printed volumes hang from wooden stalls beside maps, scientific diagrams, and translated manuscripts. The air smells of ink, damp paper, roasting, chestnuts, and river water drifting through busy streets. A bookseller quietly offers hidden material beneath the counter. Not illegal, exactly. Merely dangerous. The volume contains translated passages discussing heavenly beings descending before the flood and teaching humanity forbidden arts. Marginal notes compare these stories with classical myths, astronomical observations, and emerging scientific theories. Readers devour such material eagerly. One curious footnote preserved by researchers from Cambridge reveals that several Renaissance scholars attempted reconciling ancient supernatural narratives with natural philosophy, rather than dismissing mythology entirely. Intellectual boundaries remained fluid during this transitional era between medieval spirituality and modern science. That fluidity creates excitement everywhere. Painters depict towering heavenly figures descending dramatically through storm clouds. Poets write about forbidden wisdom corrupting ambitious souls. Court philosophers debate whether ancient myths conceal hidden scientific truths beneath symbolic language. The Watchers become intellectually fashionable. You enter a candle-lit workshop where artists study anatomy, geometry, and celestial movement with obsessive dedication. Their tables overflow with sketches of wings, giant figures, and star charts copied from rediscovered manuscripts. One painter speaks passionately while mixing pigments beside an open window overlooking crowded streets below. Humanity, he insists, fears the Watchers because they resemble humanity itself, brilliant, curious, ambitious, fatally drawn toward crossing boundaries. The idea unsettles everyone listening. Research from Yale and Stanford demonstrates that Renaissance thinkers increasingly interpreted ancient myths psychologically and morally rather than purely theologically. Stories about divine rebellion became reflections upon human pride, intellectual ambition, and ethical responsibility during periods of rapid cultural change. And change accelerates constantly now. New continents appear on expanding maps. Astronomers challenge traditional understanding of the heavens. Scientific observation slowly competes with inherited authority. The universe suddenly feels larger and stranger than previous generations imagined. Naturally, the old legends adapt again. One scandalous aside spreading through intellectual circles claims certain secret societies study Watcher traditions as encoded accounts of advanced ancient civilizations destroyed before recorded history. Historians from Princeton note that Renaissance fascination with hidden wisdom fueled countless speculative theories connecting mythology, science, and lost knowledge. Most scholars dismiss the more extreme claims publicly. Privately, many remain intrigued, because the age rewards bold imagination. You continue through crowded university halls where students debate astronomy beneath frescoed ceilings painted with constellations and celestial beings. Heated arguments echo through stone corridors scented with candle wax and damp wool cloaks. Can ancient myths contain fragments of historical truth? Did earlier civilizations possess knowledge, later forgotten? Could stories about heavenly teachers symbolize contact between radically different cultures during humanity's earliest development? No agreement emerges. That uncertainty energizes the era instead of frightening it. Records examined by researchers from Columbia and the University of Chicago confirm that Renaissance intellectuals frequently blended empirical investigations with mystical speculation. Modern distinctions separating science, philosophy, and spirituality had not fully solidified yet. The boundaries remain wonderfully unstable. You attend a private gathering hosted inside a wealthy patron's candlelit mansion, where scholars, navigators, and astronomers exchange controversial ideas over spiced wine and roasted figs. Heavy curtains block outside noise while rain taps softly against stained glass windows. One elderly navigator reveals strange reports collected from distant voyages. Remote cultures separated by oceans possess surprisingly similar myths involving heavenly beings teaching forbidden knowledge before catastrophic destruction followed. Flood stories, giant legends, celestial visitors. The room falls thoughtful afterward. Research from Harvard confirms that early global exploration exposed European scholars to mythological parallels across widely separated civilizations, intensifying debates about universal symbolism versus shared historical origins. The Watcher legends suddenly feel global, not local superstition, something older and emotionally universal. For a moment, it feels as though humanity collectively remembers fragments of the same ancient anxiety through different cultural languages. Advancement brings power. Power invites corruption. Curiosity repeatedly pushes civilization toward dangerous thresholds. The old themes survive every intellectual revolution. You wander afterward through rain-soaked streets glowing beneath lantern light, reflected across wet stone. Musicians play softly inside crowded taverns. Printing presses continue clattering long after midnight. The city hums with restless energy impossible to restrain. Then you notice an astronomer alone atop a university tower. He studies the sky through carefully polished lenses while distant thunder mutters beyond dark clouds. Strange diagrams cover his observation table beside manuscripts discussing heavenly rebellions and ancient catastrophes. The astronomer gestures upward without looking away from the stars. The universe appears far larger than our ancestors imagined, he whispers. Perhaps the old stories survive because people sensed humanity was never truly alone within creation. The thought lingers uneasily. Research from Stanford and Cambridge demonstrates that expanding astronomical knowledge during the Renaissance transformed spiritual imagination profoundly. Discovering a vast cosmos challenged traditional assumptions about humanity's place within divine order. The heavens become mysterious again, not smaller, larger, more unsettling. You stand beside the astronomer while clouds slowly part overhead, revealing countless stars burning above sleeping rooftops. Ancient tribes once feared heavenly beings descending from those distant lights. Medieval monks feared hidden corruption within humanity itself. Now Renaissance thinkers fear something equally profound, that human curiosity may uncover truths impossible to control once revealed, below the city dreams, beneath flickering lanterns and unfinished ideas. Scholars copy forbidden texts. Artists paint falling angels with tragic beauty. Navigators sail toward unknown continents carrying old legends into new worlds. And somewhere between science and myth, the Watchers continue waiting patiently inside humanity's imagination, refusing either yes or complete belief or complete dismissal. The unfinished ideas spread across continents faster than any empire can contain them. You feel the world accelerating now. Printing presses multiply, telescopes improved, ships cross oceans carrying maps, artifacts, and unsettling discoveries back toward crowded European ports. The heavens themselves begin changing. Astronomers peer through polished lenses and realize ancient assumptions about the universe may be deeply flawed. Planets move differently than expected. Moons circle distant worlds. Comets follow patterns instead of divine moods. The cosmos gradually transforms from sacred mystery into something measurable. Yet strangely, the Watcher legends do not disappear. They evolve again. You walk through an early scientific society where scholars gather beneath oil lamps, discussing astronomy, geology, and ancient history with intense excitement. Brass instruments gleam across polished tables. The air smells of hot wax, ink, damp coats, and faint chemical smoke drifting from experimental equipment nearby. Knowledge? It is powerful here. Dangerously powerful. Research from Oxford and Stanford confirms that the scientific revolution challenged traditional religious authority while simultaneously increasing fascination with humanity's ancient origins. A scientific inquiry expanded, intellectuals revisited old myths, searching for historical or symbolic meaning beneath supernatural language. The old stories suddenly faced new questions. Could flood myths preserve geological memory? Did giant legends emerge from fossil discoveries misunderstood by ancient people? Might heavenly beings represent symbolic attempts to explain advanced knowledge appearing suddenly within early civilizations? The debates become more analytical now, but never less emotional. One curious footnote noted by historians from Cambridge reveals that several early scientists remained deeply interested in biblical chronology, angelology, and ancient catastrophe traditions, even while pioneering modern scientific methods. Rational investigation and mystical speculation continued overlapping far longer than modern audiences often assume. You continue through lecture halls where natural philosophers display enormous animal bones excavated from remote cliffs and quarries. Some observers insist the remains belong to legendary giants destroyed before the flood. Others argue they came from extinct creatures unknown to ancient humanity. The argument grows heated quickly, because evidence rarely eliminates mystery completely. Research from Yale and Harvard demonstrates that fossil discoveries profoundly influenced early modern interpretations of ancient myths. Before paleontology developed as a formal science, Enormous bones naturally inspired speculation about giants, monsters, and lost worlds described within traditional narratives. Human imagination fills gaps instinctively. You drift toward an archaeological expedition unfolding beside half-buried ruins emerging from desert sands under scorching sunlight. Workers uncover shattered statues, strange inscriptions, and ceremonial chambers untouched for centuries. Every discovery fuels fresh speculation about forgotten civilizations possessing unexpected sophistication. One scholar kneels beside a weathered carving depicting winged figures descending from the sky. His hands tremble slightly. Could these images connect to the ancient Watcher traditions preserved across distant cultures? No agreement emerges among the excavation team. Some researchers dismiss the similarities as coincidence shaped by universal symbolism. Others privately wonder whether fragments of forgotten history survive scattered beneath mythology. The uncertainty itself becomes addictive. Research from Princeton and Columbia confirms that archaeology dramatically reshaped 19th century understanding of ancient civilizations. Discoveries in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and surrounding regions revived scholarly interest in early religious narratives once considered purely legendary. The past suddenly feels tangible again. Not imaginary, buried. You notice how ordinary people react differently than academics. Newspapers sensationalize every discovery. Public lectures overflow with fascinated audiences eager for stories connecting science with ancient mystery. Artists paint towering fallen angels beside ruined temples and storm-filled skies. Modernity awakens ancient fears instead of replacing them. One scandalous aside spreading through intellectual circles claims advanced prehistoric civilizations existed before recorded history and vanished during catastrophic floods remembered dimly through global mythology. Historians from the University of Chicago note that speculation about lost civilizations intensified whenever archaeological discoveries challenged established timelines or cultural assumptions. Such theories flourish especially during periods of rapid scientific change. People crave hidden continuity, linking old myths with new discoveries. You travel next into crowded industrial cities, where factory smoke darkens the sky and machines reshape daily life with relentless speed. Steam engines roar through railway stations. Telegraph wires stretch across landscapes once crossed only by horseback messengers. Humanity now commands extraordinary power. Yet anxiety deepens too. Research from Stanford demonstrates that industrialization generated widespread cultural unease surrounding technology alienation and moral decline. Ancient myths about forbidden knowledge regained emotional relevance within societies experiencing unprecedented transformation. The Watchers become symbols once more, not heavenly beings descending physically from the stars. Warnings about intelligence detached from wisdom. You sit inside a smoky coffee house listening to philosophers debate whether scientific progress alone can guide civilization ethically. One speaker argues humanity has inherited the Watcher's dangerous gifts without developing equal moral maturity. Another laughs dismissively. Superstition belongs to the past, he insists. Science will eventually explain every mystery rationally. Yet even he glances uneasily toward newspaper headlines describing industrial accidents, mechanized warfare, and social unrest spreading through rapidly changing cities. Knowledge transforms society faster than human nature evolves. The old tension survives intact. You wander through a newly opened natural history museum where enormous skeletons tower beneath vaulted ceilings. Children stare upward in awe while scholars deliver lectures about extinct worlds existing millions of years before humanity appeared. For a moment, ancient giant legends feel strangely understandable again. People encountering such bones without modern science would naturally imagine colossal beings walking the earth long ago. Research from Cambridge and Harvard supports the idea that fossil interpretation influenced mythology across numerous cultures. Large prehistoric remains frequently inspired stories involving giants, dragons, and catastrophic destruction. Science explains certain mysteries beautifully, yet other questions grow larger afterward. If humanity misunderstood fossils, storms, and astronomical events for thousands of years, what else might current generations still misunderstand? The possibility unsettles even confident rationalists. You climb an observatory hill overlooking an industrial city glowing beneath smoke-stained twilight. Far below, factories pulse with mechanical energy while trains scream across iron tracks carrying humanity toward uncertain futures. Above, the stars remain unchanged. Ancient people once imagined heavenly watchers studying human civilization from those distant lights. Modern astronomers calculate planetary motion and cosmic distance with astonishing precision, yet both groups still feel the same quiet awe, the same loneliness, the same suspicion that intelligence without restraint may eventually destroy itself. A young scientist beside the observatory telescope speaks softly while adjusting polished brass instruments. Perhaps she says the watchers survive because humanity instinctively understands that every discovery carries consequences beyond immediate imagination. Below, machines thunder through crowded streets while laboratories uncover new forces hidden inside nature itself. The age of science marches forward confidently, and somewhere beneath that confidence, the oldest fear still whispers patiently, what if forbidden knowledge changes civilization faster than civilization can survive the change? The fear follows humanity into the deserts again, not because civilization retreats from science, but because science itself begins digging directly into the oldest graves of memory. You feel this strange excitement while standing beside archaeological camps scattered across scorching sands, where wind sweeps endlessly across half-buried ruins. Every shovel uncovers another question. Tents flap beneath dry desert heat. Crates overflow with broken pottery, carved tablets, and fragments of statues staring upward through centuries of dust. Scholars move waftily between excavation trenches carrying brushes, notebooks, and endless theories. The past refuses silence now. Research from Oxford and Yale confirms that major archaeological discoveries during the 19th and 20th centuries dramatically reshaped public understanding of ancient civilizations. Excavations across Mesopotamia and surrounding regions uncovered texts and imagery resembling traditions long preserved within religious and mythological narratives. The Watcher legends suddenly seem connected to physical history again. You walk beside an exhausted translator inside a dim canvas tent glowing beneath lantern light. The air smells of parchment sweat, dry earth, and strong coffee simmering slowly over heated coals. Tablets covered with wedge-shaped markings rest across every available surface. One newly translated fragment describes heavenly beings descending to instruct humanity in celestial observation and metalworking. The translator pauses thoughtfully. The wording resembles traditions preserved thousands of miles away within entirely different cultures. That similarity unsettles everyone involved. One curious footnote discussed by researchers from Cambridge reveals that early archaeologists often approached ancient texts with emotional intensity bordering upon obsession. Discovering parallels between mythological traditions and excavated records blurred comfortable distinctions between legend, religion, and historical memory. The emotional atmosphere becomes electric. Newspapers publish sensational headlines about lost civilizations and forgotten gods. Public lectures overflow with fascinated audiences. Wealthy patrons fund increasingly ambitious expeditions hoping to uncover proof supporting ancient mysteries whispered across generations. And naturally, speculation expands far beyond evidence. You continue through excavation sites where workers uncover massive stone foundations suggesting cities far older and larger than historians once believed possible. Intricate astronomical alignments appear within temple ruins. Advanced irrigation systems emerge beneath buried streets. Ancient humanity suddenly seems more sophisticated than expected. Research from Stanford and Princeton confirms that archaeological discoveries repeatedly challenged assumptions regarding early civilizations' complexity. Evidence of advanced engineering, mathematics, and social organization force scholars to reconsider simplistic narratives about prehistoric societies. The Watchers return through this intellectual opening. Some researchers cautiously suggest ancient myths may preserve distorted memories of influential teacher classes or advanced neighboring cultures introducing transformative technologies. Others insist symbolic interpretation remains more convincing than literal speculation. No agreement emerges. That uncertainty attracts public fascination immediately. One scandalous aside spreads rapidly through popular magazines and lecture halls. Several amateur theorists claim the Watchers were not supernatural beings at all, but survivors from an advanced civilization destroyed before recorded history began. According to these ideas, flood myths preserve memories of global catastrophe wiping out a forgotten golden age. Professional historians mostly reject such claims, yet ordinary people love them, because the theories transform ancient stories into hidden historical puzzles rather than purely spiritual allegories. You stand beside a recently uncovered temple entrance, while sunset paints surrounding cliffs deep orange and crimson. Carved figures line the weathered walls, winged beings, towering rulers, celestial symbols arranged with astonishing precision. The archaeologists argue quietly nearby. One insists the imagery reflects ordinary religious symbolism common throughout ancient cultures. Another believes certain details appear unusually specific compared with surrounding traditions. The debate stretches late into the night. Research from Columbia and Harvard demonstrates that humans naturally impose narrative connections upon incomplete historical evidence, especially when emotionally compelling myths already exist within cultural imagination. Still, the emotional power surrounding these discoveries feels undeniable. You notice workers staring nervously at certain carvings after dark. Even trained scholars occasionally lower their voices while discussing particular inscriptions. Ancient ruins create strange psychological effects. Standing among forgotten civilizations reminds people how temporary every modern certainty may eventually become. Dust covers everything equally. You drift into a museum opening where newly recovered artifacts attract enormous crowds beneath electric lights and polished marble floors. Children stare wide-eyed at giant statues and ancient astronomical instruments displayed behind glass cases. One exhibit proves especially popular. Fragments of text discussing heavenly teachers and catastrophic floods. Visitors whisper excitedly while reading translations describing forbidden knowledge spreading among early humanity before destruction followed. Some treat the material academically. Others appear genuinely unsettled, because modern civilization now possesses its own dangerous knowledge. Machines dominate industry. Scientific breakthroughs reshape warfare. Communication travels instantly across continents. Humanity approaches powers ancient generations could barely imagine. The old myths begin feeling uncomfortably relevant again. Research from the University of Chicago confirms that periods of rapid technological advancement often revive cultural fascination with myths involving forbidden knowledge, divine punishment, and civilization collapse. Ancient narratives provide emotional frameworks for processing modern anxieties. The Watchers become mirrors once more, not necessarily historical beings, reflections of humanity's fear regarding its own accelerating capabilities. You attend a late-night discussion hosted inside a university lecture hall, where archaeologists, historians, and philosophers debate whether ancient myths preserve authentic historical memory beneath symbolic language. One professor argues passionately that similarities between global flood stories likely reflect shared environmental trauma following prehistoric sea level rise. Another warns against transforming mythology into pseudo-history without sufficient evidence. A younger scholar raises a quieter possibility. Perhaps the real significance lies not in proving literal Watchers existed, but understanding why humanity repeatedly invents stories about advanced beings granting dangerous knowledge. The room grows thoughtful afterward. No agreement has been reached among modern researchers regarding how much historical information survives encoded within ancient mythology. Scholars continue debating the relationship between collective memory, symbolic storytelling, and archaeological evidence. The uncertainty remains permanent. You leave the lecture hall beneath cold evening rain reflecting city lights across wet pavement. Cars hiss through crowded streets while distant radio broadcasts discuss scientific breakthroughs, political tensions, and archaeological discoveries with equal urgency. Modern civilization suddenly feels ancient and fragile simultaneously. For a moment, it feels as though humanity endlessly repeats the same emotional cycle. Curiosity drives advancement. Advancement creates power. Power generates fear. fear resurrects old stories warning against knowledge divorced from wisdom. Above the glowing city, clouds drift slowly apart, revealing scattered stars. Ancient shepherds once feared heavenly watchers descending from those distant lights. Archaeologists now uncover shattered remnants of civilizations that feared exactly the same thing thousands of years earlier. And somewhere between myth memory and historical possibility, the old legends continue, waiting patiently for each new generation to reinterpret them according to its own anxieties. Each new generation does reinterpret the legends, especially once universities begin examining them with modern tools instead of pure speculation. You feel the atmosphere changing again while walking through quiet academic campuses, where ivy climbs stone walls and students hurry between lecture halls carrying laptops, notebooks, and exhausted ambition. The setting looks modern. The questions remain ancient. Inside climate-controlled archives, researchers now compare mythology, archaeology, linguistics, psychology, and astronomy with astonishing precision. Databases replace candlelit libraries. Satellite imaging reveals buried ruins invisible from ground level. Artificial intelligence sorts ancient language patterns faster than medieval monks could copy a single page. Yet the Watchers still resist simple explanation. Research from Harvard and Stanford confirms that myths involving divine teachers and catastrophic punishment appear across remarkably diverse cultures worldwide. Modern scholars increasingly approach these narratives through interdisciplinary study, rather than isolated religious interpretation. The mystery grows more complicated instead of disappearing. You enter a university seminar room where graduate students gather around projected images of ancient carvings and translated manuscripts. Coffee cups crowd the tables beside glowing computer screens. Rain taps softly against tall windows overlooking autumn trees scattered across campus pathways. A professor gestures towards the comparative charts. Flood myths, giant traditions, heavenly visitors, forbidden knowledge. The same motifs repeat constantly across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. Why? The room fills with competing theories immediately. Some students argue human psychology naturally generates similar symbolic stories when confronting universal fears such as disaster, mortality, and social collapse. Others believe ancient trade networks transmitted myths farther than historians once realized. A few cautiously suggest the possibility of shared historical experiences preserved through distorted oral tradition. Nobody claims certainty. Research from Oxford and Cambridge demonstrates that mythological parallels can emerge through both cultural exchange and independent psychological development. Human beings facing similar environmental and social pressures often create surprisingly related narratives even without direct contact. Still, certain details remain difficult to ignore completely. One curious footnote discussed in a lecture from Yale highlights how many ancient traditions specifically connect advanced knowledge with moral danger, rather than portraying progress as purely positive. Early societies repeatedly framed technological or intellectual advancement as spiritually risky. That pattern fascinates modern scholars. You continue through university corridors lined with posters advertising conferences about ancient religion, cognitive anthropology, and comparative mythology. The Watchers now belong simultaneously to history department psychology seminars, religious studies, programs, and popular culture research. The legends refuse academic confinement too. One scandalous aside circulating online claims, several respected scientists secretly believe ancient civilizations encountered non-human intelligence mistaken for divine beings. Historians from Princeton note that modern fascination with extraterrestrial theories often reflects contemporary technological imagination projected backward onto ancient myths. Most researchers dismiss such claims cautiously, yet public fascination keeps growing. Because modern humanity lives beneath different skies now. Satellites orbit overhead. Space telescopes reveal distant galaxies. Scientists openly discuss the statistical possibility of intelligent life elsewhere within the universe. Ancient heavenly visitor stories suddenly feel less impossible emotionally, Even if evidence remains absent, the psychological landscape changes. Research from Columbia and the University of Chicago confirms that scientific discovery can simultaneously reduce certain supernatural beliefs while increasing existential curiosity about humanity's place within a vast cosmos. You attend a public lecture hosted inside a packed university auditorium, where an anthropologist discusses why Watcher legends continue thriving across digital culture. The audience ranges from serious researchers to conspiracy enthusiasts, clutching notebooks filled with highlighted theories. The anthropologist speaks calmly. Humans create stories about forbidden knowledge whenever societies experience rapid transformation, she explains. Ancient tribes feared metallurgy and astronomy reshaping civilization. Modern cultures fear artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and surveillance technology. The symbolism adapts naturally. The Watchers survive because the emotional structure behind them remains relevant. The audience listens carefully. Outside evening settles across campus while students hurry beneath glowing streetlights carrying umbrellas against cold rain. Somewhere nearby, music drifts from dormitory windows. Ordinary modern life continues peacefully around these ancient discussions. Yet unease lingers beneath contemporary confidence. You notice it during smaller conversations afterward where researchers admit privately that technological acceleration increasingly outpaces ethical consensus. Artificial intelligence evolves rapidly. Biotechnology rewrites assumptions about life itself. Social systems strain beneath constant digital pressure. Humanity once again approaches unfamiliar thresholds. The old myths begin whispering louder during such moments. Research from Stanford confirms that apocalyptic narratives and forbidden knowledge myths often surge during periods marked by technological uncertainty and social fragmentation. Ancient stories provide emotional language for modern anxieties difficult to articulate otherwise. You walk beside a cognitive psychologist crossing the campus courtyard beneath dripping trees. She studies why certain myths endure psychologically across generations despite changing cultural conditions. The Watchers persist, she says thoughtfully, because they combine several powerful human fears simultaneously. Fear of corrupted authority, fear of uncontrolled intelligence, fear of knowledge arriving before wisdom, and perhaps deepest of all, fear that humanity secretly desires dangerous knowledge even while recognizing its risks. The rain intensifies around you. Students rush past laughing beneath shared umbrellas, mostly unaware that people thousands of years earlier wrestled with remarkably similar emotional tensions beneath completely different civilizations. One modern debate grows especially heated within academic circles. Were ancient myths originally intended literally at all? Some researchers argue modern audiences misunderstand symbolic storytelling traditions by forcing historical interpretation onto narratives designed primarily for moral, spiritual, or psychological reflection. Others disagree strongly. They point toward unusual consistency surrounding certain details repeated across independent traditions. Heavenly descent, forbidden teaching, hybrid beings, catastrophic judgment. No agreement has been reached. The uncertainty remains strangely productive. You enter a digital archive room where ancient manuscripts appear instantly upon glowing screens. Fragments once hidden within remote monasteries or buried beneath desert ruins now circulate globally through online databases accessible from nearly anywhere. Humanity has democratized forbidden knowledge itself. The irony feels almost poetic. Ancient priests guarded dangerous stories behind temple walls. Medieval monks concealed controversial texts beneath stone floors. Modern civilization uploads everything directly into worldwide networks where anyone can explore mysteries previously restricted to elites. Curiosity has become universal. Above the campus observatory, clouds finally break apart, revealing scattered stars beyond city light pollution. A small group of astronomy students studies distant galaxies through computerized telescopes while discussing planetary systems potentially capable of supporting life. The universe appears unimaginably vast now, yet the emotional questions remain intimate and ancient. Who watches humanity? What knowledge should remain restrained? And why do civilizations repeatedly fear that intelligence without wisdom may ultimately destroy the very societies it transforms. The students continue studying the stars while digital screens glow softly against the darkness. And somewhere deep within humanity's collective imagination, the Watchers still wait patiently beside those distant lights, neither fully myth nor fully memory, but something hauntingly suspended between both possibilities. Something hauntingly suspended between myth and memory eventually finds perfect territory inside modern entertainment. You feel the shift immediately once glowing screens replace monastery candles and crowded theatres replace ancient storytelling fires. The Watchers become global again, not through sacred texts or hidden manuscripts this time, but through films, novels, documentaries, and streaming platforms, and endless online discussions unfolding beneath blue midnight light. Millions of people encounter the ancient legends while half asleep on couches scrolling through videos about forbidden history and celestial rebellion. Technology transforms myth into atmosphere. You sit inside a dark movie theatre while enormous images flood the screen. Winged figures descend through storm clouds above trembling civilizations. Ancient temples crumble beneath supernatural judgment. Mysterious teachers whisper forbidden truths into desperate human ears. The audience watches silently. Some viewers interpret the story spiritually. Others see science fiction. Most simply feel the emotional pull without fully understanding why. Research from Harvard and Stanford confirms that modern popular culture frequently revives ancient mythological structures during periods of technological and social anxiety. Stories involving hidden knowledge, superior beings, and civilization collapse remain especially powerful within rapidly changing societies. The Watchers adapt perfectly to modern fears. One curious footnote noted by researchers from Oxford explains that 20th century cinema often blended religious symbolism with emerging scientific imagination. Ancient heavenly beings gradually merged with concepts involving extraterrestrials, secret technology, and cosmic surveillance. The boundaries blur constantly now. You continue through a crowded comic convention where artists sell paintings of fallen angels beside futuristic alien landscapes. Teenagers dressed as celestial warriors pose for photographs beneath neon lighting. Nearby lecturers discuss ancient mythology through microphones, while screens flash images of archaeological ruins and star-filled skies. The atmosphere feels playful, restless too. Modern culture consumes mystery endlessly because ordinary life often feels spiritually flattened beneath schedules, advertisements, and digital distraction. Ancient legends restore emotional scale. They remind people of cosmic danger and forbidden wonder beyond office buildings and phone notifications. One scandalous aside spreads widely through internet forums and late-night documentaries. Certain creators claim governments hide evidence proving ancient civilizations contacted non-human intelligences, mistaken for gods or angels. Historians from Yale note that conspiracy culture frequently repackages older supernatural anxieties into technological narratives reflecting contemporary fears about secrecy and authority. Most scholars reject such theories firmly. That rejection often increases public fascination instead of reducing it, because mystery thrives beautifully within uncertainty. You walk through a bookstore where entire shelves overflow with titles about fallen angels, lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, forbidden archaeology, and biblical mysteries. Some works approach the topic carefully through historical analysis. Others embrace wild speculation enthusiastically. Readers buy both. Research from Princeton and Columbia confirms that modern audiences increasingly seek narratives blending spirituality, history, and speculative possibility during periods marked by institutional distrust and existential uncertainty. The Watchers become emotionally flexible symbols. Religious believers interpret them through sacred tradition. Science fiction fans imagine cosmic visitors. Psychologists view them as archetypes reflecting humanity's relationship with ambition and temptation. Conspiracy theorists see hidden truths oppressed by powerful institutions. Everyone reshapes the myth slightly. You attend a documentary screening hosted inside a small independent theatre, where viewers debate passionately afterward beneath dim lobby lights smelling faintly of popcorn and coffee. One filmmaker argues ancient myths preserve encoded memories of real encounters lost beneath centuries of distortion. A historian counters that mythology reveals emotional truth rather than literal historical reporting. An audience member quietly asks whether the distinction matters completely. The room falls silent for several moments. Because modern people increasingly understand stories emotionally even when factual certainty remains impossible. Research from Cambridge demonstrates that narrative itself shapes collective identity and moral understanding regardless of historical accuracy. Myths survive because they organize emotional experience into memorable symbolic patterns. The watchers endure because they still feel psychologically real. You wander afterward through streets glowing with electronic billboards and reflected headlights sliding across wet pavement. Above the noise, skyscrapers rise like modern temples dedicated to commerce, technology, and restless ambition. For a moment, the ancient themes appear painfully familiar again. Civilization grows powerful, knowledge accelerates. Moral consensus struggles to keep pace. The old fears return wearing contemporary clothing. Artificial intelligence replaces forbidden astronomy. Genetic engineering replaces ancient alchemy. Digital surveillance replaces heavenly observation. Yet emotionally, the tension remains nearly identical. Research from the University of Chicago confirms that technological societies repeatedly generate cultural narratives warning about intelligence detached from ethical restraint. Ancient myths adapt continuously because they mirror recurring human anxieties surrounding power and responsibility. You enter a late-night apartment where friends gather around glowing screens watching videos about ancient mysteries while rain taps softly against windows overlooking the sleeping city below. Empty coffee cups scatter across the table beside open books discussing mythology and archaeology. Nobody fully believes everything presented. Nobody dismisses it entirely either. That middle ground defines modern fascination perfectly. One friend points toward footage of massive ruins aligned precisely with astronomical events. Another discusses psychological symbolism behind fallen angel traditions. A third wonders aloud whether humanity subconsciously invents these stories whenever civilization reaches dangerous technological thresholds. The conversation drifts past midnight. Outside, drones blink faintly above distant rooftops while satellites cross invisible paths beyond cloud cover. Humanity now lives surrounded by technologies ancient people would have considered supernatural, and still people hunger for older mysteries. Research from Stanford and Harvard suggests modern entertainment often functions as collective dream space where societies process fears and desires indirectly through symbolic storytelling. Myths involving cosmic observers and forbidden knowledge remain especially compelling during technologically saturated eras. The Watchers fit perfectly inside digital imagination. You notice this clearly while scrolling through endless online discussions before dawn. Thousands of strangers across different countries debate ancient texts, archaeological discoveries, supernatural theories, and philosophical interpretations simultaneously. The old campfire has become global. Human beings still gather beneath darkness asking the same uneasy questions. Who gave civilization its dangerous gifts? What hidden truths remain concealed? And can humanity survive the knowledge it continues uncovering? Outside the apartment window, dawn slowly approaches through pale grey clouds above the modern city. Traffic begins humming faintly through distant streets, while exhausted viewers continue discussing ancient heavenly beings across glowing screens. The Watchers have travelled an astonishing distance through history, from whispered tribal fear beside prehistoric fires, to temple archives, to monastery vaults, to university seminars, and finally into the endless illuminated dreamscape of modern culture where ancient anxiety never truly sleeps. Ancient anxiety never truly sleeps. It simply changes shape beneath each new century. You feel this transformation most clearly once the internet fully awakens, turning private suspicion into endless worldwide conversation flowing constantly through glowing screens. The Watchers enter conspiracy culture completely now. Not quietly either. Late-night podcasts discuss hidden bloodlines descending from fallen heavenly beings. Viral videos connect ancient carvings with secret societies controlling governments and financial systems. Anonymous forums speculate about underground archives concealing proof humanity received forbidden knowledge from non-human intelligences long ago. The atmosphere feels strangely familiar. Fear, curiosity, distrust toward powerful institutions. The same emotional ingredients surrounding the legends for thousands of years. Research from Oxford and Princeton confirms that conspiracy theories often flourish during periods of rapid technological change, political polarization, and declining trust in traditional authority structures. Ancient myths become especially attractive because they provide emotionally satisfying explanations for complex uncertainty. The Watchers adapt perfectly once again. You scroll through endless online discussions while rain falls softly outside a dark apartment window. Coffee grows cold beside the keyboard. Thousands of strangers debate ancient texts, archaeological anomalies, elite symbolism, and unexplained historical coincidences with intense conviction. Some theories remain harmlessly imaginative. Others drift into paranoia quickly. One curious footnote examined by researchers from Stanford reveals that modern conspiracy communities frequently borrow narrative structures directly from religious mythology. Hidden knowledge, corrupt elites, secret revelation, cosmic struggle between truth and deception. The emotional architecture barely changes, only the vocabulary modernizes. You continue deeper into digital labyrinths where amateur investigators compare ancient artwork with satellite imagery and classified military rumors. Grainy photographs circulate endlessly. Ordinary coincidences become evidence for hidden systems supposedly guiding civilization from the shadows. The Watchers transform into invisible puppet masters. Research from Harvard and Yale demonstrates that human beings naturally seek patterns during uncertain periods, especially when social systems appear unstable or incomprehensible. Conspiracy theories provide emotional clarity by converting chaotic complexity into intentional narrative. Someone must be controlling events. Someone must know the hidden truth. Ancient people imagined heavenly watchers observing humanity from above. Modern conspiracy culture imagines secret networks observing humanity through algorithms, surveillance systems, and hidden institutions. The symbolism evolves naturally. You sit beside a weary journalist investigating online movements blending ancient mythology with political fear. Neon signs flicker beyond cafe windows while exhausted customers stare silently into glowing phones. The journalist explains that many conspiracy communities use watcher imagery metaphorically rather than literally. Fallen beings become symbols for corrupted authority. Forbidden knowledge becomes classified information. The flood becomes societal collapse. The emotional logic remains ancient even inside modern language. One scandalous aside, spreading rapidly across social media claims powerful technological leaders secretly pursue artificial intelligence capable of transcending ordinary humanity exactly as the Watchers once surpassed mortal limitations. Historians from Columbia note that contemporary fears surrounding artificial intelligence often mirror older anxieties involving forbidden wisdom and uncontrolled creation. The comparison feels unsettlingly appropriate. Research from Cambridge confirms that societies frequently project spiritual fears onto emerging technologies. Ancient myths provide symbolic frameworks for processing innovations that appear simultaneously miraculous and threatening. You notice this constantly online. Discussions about genetic engineering resemble ancient warnings about crossing sacred boundaries. Debates over surveillance technology echo fears of invisible cosmic observers judging humanity. Artificial intelligence sparks anxiety about creations exceeding human control. The Watchers survive because modern civilization keeps reinventing their symbolic role unconsciously. You wander through a late-night technology conference where programmers, futurists, and entrepreneurs discuss humanity's approaching transformation through automation and machine learning. Giant screens pulse with abstract digital imagery. The air smells of coffee electronics and nervous ambition. The atmosphere feels almost religious. People speak about transcending biological limitation, reshaping intelligence, rebuilding civilization through their knowledge. For a moment, ancient myths and futuristic rhetoric blur together completely. Research from the University of Chicago demonstrates that technological movements often adopt spiritual language and mythological symbolism during periods of intense innovation. Human beings instinctively frame transformative change through older emotional narratives involving salvation, rebellion, and forbidden power. One speaker describes humanity standing at the threshold of a new evolutionary age driven by artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Several audience members applaud enthusiastically. Others exchange uneasy glances, because every promise of transformation carries hidden fear beneath excitement. You remember the ancient valley villagers staring at polished metal tools beside flickering fires thousands of years earlier. Their world changed too quickly. Knowledge arrived before emotional readiness. Civilization tilted toward dangerous imbalance. The emotional pattern, kuchung, repeats endlessly. One curious detail explored by researchers from Stanford suggests enduring myths survive precisely because they encode recurring social tensions rather than specific historical events. The Watchers remain psychologically relevant because humanity repeatedly encounters moments where advancement threatens existing moral frameworks. The symbols never fully expire. You leave the conference center after midnight, while cold wind sweeps through empty financial districts lined with mirrored skyscrapers. Security cameras watch silently from every corner. Distant servers process unimaginable quantities of human information every second. Modern civilization already lives beneath invisible observation. That realization deepens the old myths beautifully. Ancient people feared heavenly watchers judging human behavior from the skies. Modern societies voluntarily surrender private lives to digital systems observing nearly everything continuously. The parallels feel impossible to ignore emotionally, even if historically unrelated. Research from Harvard confirms that surveillance culture significantly influences contemporary interpretations of religious and mythological imagery involving divine observation and cosmic accountability. The Watchers become metaphors again, not fallen angels necessarily. System larger than individual humans. Intelligence is difficult to control once created. Networks observing civilization from beyond ordinary visibility. You return home before dawn and open one final discussion forum filled with arguments about whether humanity currently approaches another catastrophic threshold similar to the ancient flood myths. Climate instability, artificial intelligence, political fragmentation, biological engineering, information overload. The fears accumulate rapidly. Some participants insist ancient stories predicted modern collapse symbolically. Others accuse powerful institutions of hiding evidence about humanity's true origins. A few simply confess feeling overwhelmed by the speed of technological change surrounding ordinary life. That emotional honesty feels most convincing of all, because beneath every conspiracy theory and supernatural speculation hides a deeply human truth. People fear losing control over the systems shaping their existence. Above the sleeping city, satellites drift invisibly through darkness, while countless screens continue glowing inside apartments where strangers debate ancient mysteries across continents and time zones. The old stories survive because humanity still senses the same dangerous possibility whispered beside prehistoric fires long ago. Knowledge can illuminate civilization magnificently. Knowledge can also consume it, and somewhere within the endless digital night the Watchers continue evolving alongside human fear, curiosity, and ambition, watching vehemently as modern societies approach thresholds no ancient storyteller could have fully imagined. No ancient storyteller could have imagined glowing screens connecting billions of anxious minds across the planet at once. Yet somehow the emotional rhythm remains familiar. You feel it now while sitting quietly in the deep hours before dawn, listening to distant traffic hum beneath a sleeping city. Humanity still searches the darkness for watchers, not because evidence finally appeared, because the longing never disappeared. The old legends survive across thousands of years because they speak to something painfully human. Every generation inherits knowledge it barely understands. Every civilization fears losing control over forces it once celebrated as progress. The Watchers endure because they embody that tension perfectly. Brilliance mixed with danger. Curiosity mixed with ruin. You look back across the long river of history flowing behind these stories. Prehistoric tribes feared strange lights crossing silent skies. Flood survivors whispered about heavenly teachers bringing catastrophe through forbidden gifts. Temple priests guarded dangerous manuscripts behind sacred walls. Medieval monks copied hidden texts through freezing winters while plague haunted distant villages. Then scientists unearthed forgotten ruins. Modern culture to transform the myths into films and conspiracies, and still the emotional core remained unchanged. Research from Oxford and Stanford confirms that enduring myths often survive because they express psychological truths rather than literal historical records. Stories lasting across civilizations usually address universal human anxieties involving mortality, power, temptation, and uncertainty. The Watchers touch all four simultaneously. One curious footnote discussed by researchers from Harvard suggests myths involving forbidden knowledge become especially powerful during transitional periods when societies feel suspended between old systems and unfamiliar futures. Ancient flood ages, industrial revolutions, digital transformation. The pattern repeats. You walk slowly through a nearly empty museum during early morning silence. Soft lights illuminate ancient statues and weathered tablets behind glass. Footsteps echo gently across polished floors. Outside rain streaks faintly against enormous windows overlooking the grey city beyond. Civilizations speak quietly here. A shattered carving depicts winged figures descending from the heavens. Nearby, a display explains how different cultures developed myths about divine teachers and catastrophic judgment independently across centuries. Yet standing among these artifacts, emotional distance collapses strangely. The fears feel modern. Human beings still wonder whether knowledge arrives faster than wisdom, still worry about leaders becoming corrupted by power, still suspect unseen systems influence ordinary life beyond public understanding, still dream of hidden truth waiting somewhere just beyond accepted reality. The symbols changed. The emotions survived. Research from Cambridge and Yale demonstrates that mythology often functions as collective emotional memory rather than factual historical record. Ancient stories preserve recurring psychological experiences across generations through symbolic narrative structures. The Watchers may therefore represent something deeper than literal beings. They might symbolize humanity's uneasy relationship with intelligence itself. Because intelligence creates consequences, the first metal blade improved hunting and warfare simultaneously. Astronomy guided agriculture while inspiring fear of celestial judgment. Writing preserved wisdom while concentrating authority among elites. Artificial intelligence now promises unimaginable advancement beside equally unimaginable risks. Every era receives its forbidden gifts eventually. You pause beside a museum exhibit displaying ancient flood narratives from multiple civilizations arranged together beneath soft golden lighting. Mesopotamian tablets, early Hebrew manuscripts, Greek accounts, fragments from distant Asian traditions. Different cultures, same emotional warning. Civilization can collapse. Research from Princeton and Columbia confirms that catastrophic myths frequently preserve both environmental memory and moral reflection simultaneously. Flood stories likely emerged from real disasters, while evolving into broader symbolic meditations about human arrogance, corruption, and fragility. The Watchers fit naturally within that framework. They become catalysts exposing humanity's deepest weaknesses. One scandalous aside still debated within modern fringe circles claims governments and universities secretly suppress evidence supporting ancient contact between humanity and advanced non-human beings. Historians from the University of Chicago note that conspiracy theories surrounding hidden truth often flourish when institutional trust declines and technological complexity overwhelms ordinary understanding. Yet even without conspiracy, modern life genuinely feels difficult to comprehend fully. Invisible systems shape economies. Algorithms influence thought. Artificial intelligence learns faster each year. Ordinary people experience technological transformation almost like magic. Ancient villagers watching polished metal emerge from darkness would understand the feeling immediately. You leave the museum near sunset while cold wind carries the scent of rain and distant traffic through crowded streets. Office towers glow softly above rushing crowds, absorbed in private thoughts and illuminated screens. For a moment, everyone appears strangely isolated despite standing together. Perhaps that isolation matters too. Research from Stanford suggests supernatural and mythological beliefs often strengthen during periods of social fragmentation and existential uncertainty. Human beings seek narrative connection whenever ordinary reality feels emotionally incomplete. The Watchers offer connection through mystery. They suggest humanity exists within a larger drama. Observed, tested, warned repeatedly across history. You stop beside a bridge overlooking dark water moving silently beneath city lights. Reflections ripple across the current while trains rumble faintly in the distance. The old flood stories return gently here. Civilizations rise beside rivers because water sustains life. Civilizations also drown beside rivers because nature remains indifferent to human ambition. That tension humbles every generation eventually. A historian once wrote that myths survive not because people mistake them for history, but because they continue revealing emotional truth after historical details become uncertain. The Watchers survive because modern humanity still fears becoming too powerful without becoming wise enough first. You think about the ancient priest locking forbidden manuscripts inside hidden chambers, the Renaissance astronomer staring uneasily toward expanding heavens. The modern programmer building systems nobody fully understands anymore. Different centuries, same unease. Research from Harvard confirms that technological acceleration consistently produces ethical anxiety, exceeding society's ability to develop stable moral frameworks. Ancient myths involving catastrophic knowledge remain culturally relevant precisely because they dramatize this imbalance vividly. The stars slowly emerge above the city as clouds drift apart. Ancient people imagined heavenly beings watching from those distant lights because the night sky felt alive with intention. Modern astronomy reveals a universe far larger and stranger than previous generations could comprehend. Oddly enough, scientific discovery has not eliminated mystery. It expanded it. The cosmos now appears almost unimaginably vast. Humanity remains small beneath it despite every technological achievement. That realization keeps ancient questions alive. Who are we becoming? What knowledge should remain restrained? Can civilization survive its own intelligence? And perhaps most haunting of all, if humanity eventually creates something wiser and more powerful than itself, will modern people become the fragile mortals inside a future version of the same old story? The river continues flowing quietly beneath the bridge, while distant lights shimmer across dark water. Somewhere deep within collective memory, the Watchers remain patient, not demanding belief, only reflection. Only reflection remains now as night slowly softens toward morning. You feel the long journey settling gently inside your thoughts while the ancient stories drift across memory like smoke rising from distant fires. The Watchers have travelled beside humanity through floods, empires, monasteries, laboratories, and glowing digital cities, and still they linger, not fully believed, not fully forgotten. You walk one final time beneath a vast night sky, untouched by noise. The air feels cool and perfectly still. Grass bends softly beneath wandering wind while stars stretch endlessly above dark hills. Somewhere far away, water moves quietly through unseen rivers, exactly as it did for the earliest humans staring upward in fear and wonder. The world suddenly feels ancient again. For a moment it becomes easy imagining those first storytellers gathered beside trembling fires while distant lights crossed the heavens beyond their understanding. They lived without science, satellites, or modern certainty. Yet emotionally they already understood something permanent about human nature. Knowledge changes your power. Power tempts people. Curiosity drives people forward even when danger waits ahead. Research from Oxford and Harvard confirms that myths surviving across millennia usually endure because they capture recurring human experiences rather than isolated historical moments. The Watcher legends continue resonating because every civilization eventually confronts the same difficult balance between discovery and restraint. The ancient stories never offered simple answers. That may be their greatest wisdom. You continue walking slowly through silver moonlight while crickets hum softly across distant fields. No towering angels descend from the sky tonight. No giants roam the hills. The darkness feels peaceful now instead of threatening, yet the questions remain alive. Perhaps the Watchers, literal beings once feared by ancient humanity. Perhaps they symbolize traveling cultures introducing disruptive knowledge into isolated societies. Perhaps they emerged entirely from psychological imagination shaped by catastrophe, ambition, and existential uncertainty. No agreement has ever been reached. Research from Stanford and Cambridge demonstrates that mythological narratives often operate simultaneously across symbolic, historical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions. Trying to reduce ancient stories into only one category frequently misses their deeper cultural function. The uncertainty itself becomes meaningful. Because uncertainty invites humility, you sit beside a quiet stream reflecting scattered starlight while cool wind carries the scent of wet earth and distant pine trees. The world feels wonderfully empty here. No glowing screens, no crowded cities, only darkness, water, and the endless sky watching silently overhead. Ancient humans knew this feeling intimately. Alone beneath the cosmos, people naturally ask whether intelligence exists beyond ordinary sight. They wonder whether civilization advances wisely or blindly. They search for meaning inside suffering, progress, and collapse. The Watchers endure because they stand directly inside those questions. One curious footnote explored by researchers from Yale suggests myths involving fallen heavenly beings often reflect humanity's fear that intelligence separated from compassion eventually becomes destructive. Brilliant beings fail morally. Powerful civilizations collapse spiritually. The warning feels timeless. You remember the flood survivors rebuilding shattered settlements beside muddy riverbanks, the medieval monks hiding forbidden manuscripts beneath frozen stone floors, the modern students debating artificial intelligence under glowing campus lights. Different eras, same emotional struggle. How much knowledge should humanity pursue before wisdom catches up? Research from Princeton and the University of Chicago confirms that societies repeatedly experience periods where technological capability advances faster than ethical systems can stabilize around it. Ancient myths dramatize these tensions through unforgettable symbolic language. The Watchers become mirrors reflecting civilization back toward itself, not villains entirely, not heroes either. Warnings wrapped inside fascination. One scandalous aside, still whispered within modern culture, imagines humanity eventually creating its own Watchers through artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or machine consciousness. Future beings might observe humanity exactly as the ancient legends described celestial Watchers studying fragile mortals long ago. The idea feels unsettling, poetic too, because every generation eventually becomes ancestor myth and mystery to those arriving afterward. You lie back gently beside the stream while constellations drift overhead through slow-moving darkness. Ancient astronomers traced stories across those same stars thousands of years earlier. Their civilizations vanished. Their temples collapsed. Their languages fragmented into dust and scholarship. Yet their fears survived. That alone feels extraordinary. Research from Columbia confirms that emotional continuity across human history often proves stronger than political or technological continuity. People separated by thousands of years still wrestle with similar anxieties involving mortality, power, isolation, and meaning. The Watchers therefore reveal something deeply comforting beneath the unease. Humanity has never faced uncertainty at all. Every civilization questioned itself. Every generation feared collapse. Every age imagined unseen forces shaping destiny beyond ordinary control. And still people continued rebuilding after floods, plagues, wars, and shattered certainty. The stars slowly begin fading as the first pale traces of dawn touch the horizon. Birds stir faintly within distant trees. The darkness softens around you without fully disappearing yet. The long night approaches its ending. You breathe quietly while the ancient legends settle into silence at last. Whether the Watchers truly existed matters slightly less now than understanding why humanity kept telling their story. People needed language for dangerous knowledge, for temptation, for ambition crossing moral boundaries, for intelligence racing ahead of wisdom, and perhaps most importantly, people needed reminders that civilizations remain fragile no matter how advanced they become. The dawn brightens gradually across fields silvered by early morning mist. No heavenly figures descend, no catastrophic flood arrives. Only another ordinary sunrise waiting patiently above an imperfect world still searching for balance between curiosity and restraint. Maybe that quiet continuation is the real ending hidden inside the old stories. Humanity survives by remembering both wonder and caution together. The Watchers fade gently back into myth as birdsong spreads through cooling air and sunlight slowly touches the stream beside you. The long journey finally rests, and somewhere high above the waking earth, beyond certainty and beyond fear, the stars continue burning silently exactly as they always have. So thank you for staying with me through this long and quiet journey across the ages. From ancient fires beside forgotten rivers to modern cities glowing beneath restless skies, you've wandered through one of humanity's oldest and most haunting questions. Were the Watchers real beings descending from the heavens, or reflections of our own dangerous hunger for knowledge and power? Perhaps what matters most is not proving the legends completely true or false. Perhaps what matters is the feeling they leave behind. That uneasy reminder that every civilization carries both brilliance and fragility inside itself. Every age believes it has mastered wisdom, only to discover new temptations waiting beyond the next horizon. And maybe that is why these stories still whisper so powerfully in the quiet hours of night. They remind us that human beings have always looked upwards, searching for meaning, guidance, and reassurance beneath enormous skies. If this story stayed with you tonight, I would truly love to hear which part affected you most deeply. Was it the flood legends, the hidden manuscripts, the desert mystics, or the modern fears surrounding technology and forbidden knowledge? Share your thoughts, your theories, and even your doubts in the comments below. Reading where listeners stand on these ancient mysteries is always one of the best parts of this journey. And if you are not quite ready to leave the night behind, there is another story waiting for you on the channel. A quiet journey into the lost world of ancient civilizations buried beneath sand, jungle, and sea. Another slow descent into forgotten history, strange beliefs, and the echoes humanity leaves behind. Until then, rest gently tonight beneath the same stars that watched every civilization before us. Blessings to you and your family.